Chapter 607. The firewood in the hotel's fireplace crackled loudly. Little Red and the others were busy enjoying a rare moment of free time. However, the young adventurers were rather restless. Not only was the elf mage Yurtler the main character, even Casio, Avla, and the others had nervous expressions. Don't be so nervous. Even if the sky collapses, there'll be someone taller to hold it up. No matter how serious or nervous you all are, what's going to happen will happen. You might as well focus on your own matters. As long as you maintain a normal state of mind, no matter how difficult it is, there'll always be a solution. Adam's words sounded quite like that of a senior. His cheerful sentiments and truthfulness were quite moving. However, if someone were to laugh while watching a collection of jokes aimed at young children, laughing to the point of tears while telling you about life, that would be rather unconvincing. Youngsters, calm down, calm down. Phew. Little Red, who said that she had a normal heart, seemed to be far too normal. She simply fell asleep next to the fireplace. Meanwhile, the young girl was lying down and acting like an elder, which mysteriously made people feel that she was cute. Don't listen to these two heartless bastards. They don't worry because they're worried about other people. They don't use their brains because there's always someone else to take care of things for them. They only need to be responsible for beating people up. I glared at Adam. Don't lead your juniors into the gutter. Your attitude towards life is definitely not something these youngsters should learn. What right do you have to say that about us? At the very least, we taught Anne. Look at all the girls you taught. Are any of them normal? Adam picked at his nose as he looked at me out of the corner of his eye. This guy didn't seem like a legendary sword saint at all. How could there not be any normal ones? Eliza was a bit extreme. Fine, I admit that she was overly extreme, even if she was a bit like her father. Renee was the same as above. Glyna was becoming more and more mysterious as of late. I kept feeling like she was plotting something, but I didn't even dare to ask her. Cough, cough. At least Cohen and Barton were relatively normal. Cohen, you're completely letting them go, aren't you? He was completely imitating the ideal image of the perfect Roland in his heart, so this was the most normal. Barton, you've only taught him martial arts for a year, and he's already become very cunning. If he follows you for a few more years, it would be strange if he didn't become as cunning as you. Harloise's retort made me unhappy. She was making it sound as if I was the source of mental pollution. Aren't you? You are the source of the pollution. I will prove it with my own painting style. Let's get down to business. Marguerite, have you confirmed it? He walked up to Marguerite and asked about the current situation. Although the probability of Marguerite making a mistake was very small, there were always all kinds of hard error rates for scouting and divination spells. It was impossible to have a 100% accuracy. Yes, I used 12 types of scouting spells. 6 of them were the most convincing. First, I traced the history of this sword. This sword and its master were still in the Moonwheel capital 2 months ago. This sword was also enchanted in an elven style. According to what I know, this is a specialty of elven enchanters. The silver sword was enchanted with mithril. The sword's master must have had a high status among the elves. Based on alchemy's analysis of the materials, the silver should have been produced in the Siptun Mountains. That place is currently under the elves' control. Marguerite, who normally didn't speak much, became rather talkative when talking about her profession. At first, I listened quite seriously, but when she said, "I've searched through the Moon Elves' general heraldry database and proved that the sword's master is the eldest son of the Queso family. The Queso family is one of the top 10 major Moon Elven families. As the eldest son of the Queso family, it's highly unlikely that Queso family has left the Moonwheel capital." I felt more and more like all other evidence was meaningless. Marguerite was just as serious as always. Cough, cough, it would seem that you've confirmed it. I then received a glare from Marguerite, which meant something along the lines of "I've worked so hard, and you're just going to give such a simple conclusion?" But as she glanced at the elven mags next to her, I more or less understood why she had gone overboard this time. You're being urged to find evidence to prove that the location of the portal isn't the elves' land, but the more you prove it, the more despair you feel. I really don't know what to say. Yurtler was already on the verge of crying, so I decided not to say too much. Marguerite, do you think it's necessary to inform the elves? You decide. You're far better at making decisions that involve politics than I am. I glanced at Yurtler. Marguerite didn't make her stance clear, but her way of shifting responsibility to him already explained a lot. Since she was used to playing the role of a nanny and a normal person in my team, she should have requested that I directly inform the elves. But it would seem that she also knew how difficult it was to deal with the elves. The elves didn't have a good relationship with the mage country. The elves would always have a miraculous sense of superiority towards the mags that I'm the source of all magic, and you should be grateful that I'm teaching you magic. However, human mags constantly created new magical schools of thought that brought about greater power, which greatly surpassed the elves who didn't want to improve themselves. The elves envied the human mags, but they still maintained a mysterious arrogance. They always had a mysterious sense of contempt and pride towards human mags. The rift between the elves and human mags couldn't be more obvious. Back in the day, Marguerite had been bullied many times in the Elven Kingdom in order to learn magic. Being petty and holding grudges had always been a passive skill of an intelligent woman. Even after she became famous, Marguerite had always lacked patience towards the elves. Now, she was willing to help Yurtler not only because she was a mage, but also because this was an important matter that needed to be repeatedly verified. I glanced at these troublemakers. Not a single one of them seemed to want to make a decision. How long until the first demon wave erupts? According to historical records, actually, the first demon wave erupts suddenly every time. There's no warning at all, so there's no way to use it as a reference. However, even if it's a pure group of Chaos Abyss demons, it'll still take time to mobilize such a large army. It'll take at least 1 or 2 months. In that case, no matter what decision we make, we'll need to make it quick. Should I just ignore this information? That would be too much of a waste. While I was hesitating, a pitch-black bat suddenly flew in through the window and landed on my shoulder. Not only that, there was also a fairy news report on the Chaos Abyss on my arm. Why did the 3 main gods fight each other in the middle of the night? Why was Anslo seriously injured? Damn it, where did this super headline come from? I skimmed over the news and discovered that it was all groundless rumors. However, some facts were certain. The location of the fight was Anslo's dimensional kingdom. The 3 main gods who had fought against Anslo included the elf lord Anslo, Abyss Prince Cavendish, and Sophocles the Deceiver. Judging from the time of the fight, it should have been about 2 days ago. The result was quite obvious from the headline. It would take more than 1 or 2 years for a main god to recover from his injuries. This situation was becoming more and more difficult to understand. Are the elves going to be finished? I didn't hesitate any longer. Since Anslo had been temporarily immobilized, it would be inconceivable if the elves didn't hurry up and do something. It was highly likely that the demon wave would begin at any moment. If the elves had half a year, they could attempt to take over other countries' territories. If the elves had 3 months, they could organize a large-scale escape. If the elves only had 1 month, they would be limited in what they could do. I'll go talk to the fairies later and have them sell this information to the moon elves. The moon elves have the fastest channels. I'll give 60% of the profit to your team. After all, this was mostly your team's contribution. As for the rest, cough, cough, cough. The dwarf priest who had remained silent all this time suddenly interrupted me. I instantly understood when I saw him awkwardly pointing at the gold coin emblem on his chest. 50% will go to your team. 20% will go to the Goddess of Wealth's church as hush money for Bayana. The rest will go to us. This wasn't because we lacked money. It was because nothing could be accomplished without rules. Since we were participating in this mission as adventurers, it was only natural that we would receive our rewards according to adventurers' rules. This wasn't just because of money. If the rescuers didn't receive any benefits, adventurers wouldn't frequently help each other. Adventurers were able to cooperate with each other to complete difficult missions. This was the foundational principle of splitting rewards according to how much effort they put in. I can save the world, but I must pay the reward for saving the world. From a certain standpoint, This was the foundational reason why adventurers were so popular in every dimension. By now, splitting the reward 50/50ths was already quite generous. After all, we had basically saved their lives. Based on adventurers' unspoken rules, it was quite normal for us to split the reward in half. Bayana had been guiding our team all this time. If it hadn't been for her, our team wouldn't have been able to reach the 100th level of the Chaos Abyss. So, we also had the right to receive the reward. However, it was only right that we give half to the original team, who had put in the most effort. Although this was only a piece of information, it was related to the destruction of an entire species. Plus, the fairies who were skilled at extortion were acting as the middleman. Considering how astonishingly rich the moon elves were, I refused to believe that they wouldn't be able to extort several god equipment out of me. Just the 100th level of the Chaos Abyss was already quite a large number. The dwarf priest smiled wryly in embarrassment. Our goddess said that she wanted 30% of the reward. Apart from her own share, she also needed to pay the Holy Knight Squadron's reward and death compensation. All right, it's settled then. I would have forgotten if she hadn't mentioned it. Although the Holy Knight Squadron hadn't been very useful, at least some of them had died. Afterwards, the Holy Knight Squadron said that they had their own escape routes, so we parted ways at the 100th level of the Chaos Abyss. Did they successfully return to the mortal plane? Did Donates find them? The bearded dwarf priest nodded. It was good news that most of the Holy Knight Squadron members were safe. Now then, it would be up to us to complete our own mission. Weren't we going to reinforce the main battlefield at the Moonwheel capital? I didn't intend to return to the Hades Channel just yet. Not even a main god would have the ability to directly fight against the demon wave. Since everyone's here and everyone's here, let's farm a boss first. A main god boss. Chapter 608. It was an eternally pitch-black sky. Even though there were no dark clouds, the sky was eternally shrouded in darkness. A faintly discernible golden tower in the sky was the only source of light. Unfortunately, that light was far too faint, and was only enough to guide the way. The sky was black, and so was the ground. But the miraculous part was that anyone could see very far. Perhaps the moment that I entered this world, my physical eyes had already been replaced by my soul's eyes. Damn, you actually have such a trick up your sleeve. Others have an old grandpa with them, but you have an entire world and a main god with you. Adam was quite astonished, but he seemed to be exclaiming in the wrong direction. Don't mention it. I have more than that with me at all times. But the problem is that none of them are easy to deal with. Everyone else's system was like a main character's life. They could use cheats to defeat bosses and level up faster, but my system? From day to night, she made it her mission to scam me, and 99% of those fate points became useless. In the end, I found out that it was just a scheme within another scheme. Not to mention the fact that my reputation was completely ruined by her in my duel with her. Every time I met something good or something like a main character's life, 90% no, based on my experience, 100% of the good stuff was a trap or a trap. Bringing an old grandpa with you? I did have an old granny who was a super senior in terms of experience. She even gave me a lot of magical information. But, she betrayed me at a critical moment and almost killed me. Now, she had even become a boss that I needed to kill. That's right, we were currently fighting a boss, a main god level boss, Undead Emperor Conservation. The bug-like region of the Hades was incredibly important to me. Not to mention, the mage floating city of Yongya City was also incredibly important to me. If conservation here became my enemy, she would also cut off my connection with the main gods of the Hades. She would basically be grabbing me by the throat. Since I had all the combat strength I needed to deal with, it was only natural that I would get rid of all my worries. The battle had already begun, but we were still so relaxed. There was a reason why Adam, a professional cannon fodder, was still so relaxed. Today, neither of us were the main characters. The sky of the Hades was still dark. However, the Black Land was now filled with a sea of ice and fire. One side was filled with snowy mountains and snowstorms. Countless undead and evil spirits wandered about. The Frost Dragon and Little Ice Dragon were the vanguard in the sky, and the endless icicles and snow were part of the snowstorm. In the middle of all the ghosts and ice, there was a gigantic skeleton made of ice crystals. The skeleton's head was almost as high as the clouds. There was a snow-white gazebo protected by the skeleton's skeleton. The undead emperor, who was wearing extravagant formal attire, was in this gazebo. On the other side was a sea of flames. On the riverbed made of lava, magma was spreading everywhere. Countless fire elementals jumped around in the sea of lava. The moment they emerged, the sea of lava gave them magma armor and flame weapons. In the next instant, they laughed maniacally as they charged towards the ice creatures and the undead. Among the low-level, mid-level, and high-level fire elementals, the most eye-catching ones were the three giant beasts. The one in the lead was a gigantic beast from the chaos abyss that seemed to be made of flames. Its 4 hooves were tearing the ground apart, and the volcanoes on its gigantic body were erupting. Its bloodthirsty eyes were filled with hatred. Its weapons were a fiery beheading sword and an inferno demon whip. Every time it swung its inferno demon whip, the ground would crack open, and even more magma and fire elemental creatures would gush out. Those who were familiar with the Chaos Abyss would recognize these two god equipment and its master, the Lord of Putrefaction, Ladvioka. The other gigantic beast was quite nostalgic. It was the Soul Devourer Karkagil, who had led his army to attack Sulphur Mountain City back in the day. He still carried his god equipment oil lamp. However, what jumped out from the lamp were fire skeletons that were laughing maniacally as they self-destructed at their enemies. The last one seemed rather unfamiliar. It was a gigantic tortoise lizard covered in flames. This tortoise lizard was twice the size of Ladvioka, and its gigantic body was the size of an entire volcano. Every single pillar on its body was as sturdy as a mountain. This tortoise lizard didn't advance. It simply lay on the ground, and its only gigantic eye was locked onto its enemies. On top of this tortoise lizard's forehead was a single horn. This tortoise lizard's master was in this castle. I didn't recognize this tortoise lizard, but his name was recorded in the legends, the ancient fire elemental god Aralavis. She's now a main god. Adam had a rather complex expression. I knew that he wasn't referring to undead emperor conservation, as it was no secret that conservation had broken through to become a main god. He was referring to someone else, someone that we were quite familiar with. That's hard to say. Even main gods don't have a fixed level of power. At any rate, anyone who can completely suppress a powerful god is already a main god. But judging from the current situation, even if she's not a main god yet, she's not far from it. Right, Marguerite, how does it feel to be surpassed by your disciple in every aspect? It's quite complicated. Actually, I think that you're the one who finds this even more difficult to accept. I silently nodded. The powerful existence on top of this gigantic beast was the half-demon that I used to think of as my daughter, Eliza. Although her power as a marauder seems rather ridiculous, what's even more ridiculous is probably her luck. Perhaps she'll be able to break Cavendish's record of being the youngest main god to become a main god. A bleeding dragon head was currently tearing at a black beast. These two beasts furiously fought against each other until the very last moment, finally forming an imprint of two beasts biting each other. This was Eliza's soul imprint marauder. This soul imprint was quite unique. It perfectly represented the very essence of the Chaos faction, the strong preying on the weak, survival of the fittest. The strong would trample on the weak to evolve. As long as the elemental affinity is compatible, she'll be able to devour any power that she can bear. This is basically cheating. She's given a direct ticket to the peak right after entering legend rank. The will of the Chaos Abyss. Cynthia truly cares for Eliza. Fortunately, Cynthia isn't here anymore. Otherwise, I really wouldn't be able to rest easy. 9 years ago, in order to obtain the power to control fate, Eliza devoured the hearts of the fire elemental god and demon count when she had just entered legend rank. These demon hearts were the crystallization of their power. Eliza, who obtained the favor of the Chaos Abyss, relied on these two Chaos Flame treasures to successfully advance to become a demon marquis, breaking the historical record for demon rank advancement. 7 years ago, in the Battle of the Hades, I worked so hard to kill a main god-level demon lord. My greatest spoil of war was still the demon heart of the strongest inferno demon, Ladvioka. In order to protect Eliza from Cavendish, I directly gave this heart to Eliza to devour. An ancient fire elemental god, a fire element demon count, and the strongest inferno demon main god. It's as if fate is constantly urging her to reach the peak. I didn't know how strong Eliza was right now. I believed that the weak would be unable to measure the limits of the strong. Indeed, Eliza was already far stronger than I was. All I knew was that her current power level had far surpassed that of ordinary demon lords and powerful gods. And judging from how she was able to fight a main god-level undead emperor to a standstill, she wasn't too far away from becoming a main god. I heard that she's still working hard on her cultivation in the Land of Spring, learning from the Titans and Hades gods. I never expected that she'd already reached such a level. I no longer have anything to teach her. Marguerite felt both gratified and regretful. As Eliza's magic teacher, she had taught such a powerful disciple. However, Eliza hadn't relied on magic to reach her current level. Marguerite probably felt rather complex inside. If only she had gotten serious earlier, she probably wouldn't have had to flee when she fought against Donates. However, I shook my head. I could more or less understand Eliza's decision. Even if we defeated and killed Donates, apart from attracting even more dangerous gazes, there wouldn't be much to be gained. Eliza's sudden increase in combat strength was completely unexpected. She was a trump card that very few people knew about. In a critical battle, a trump card that was suddenly revealed could be used to obtain important combat results. It would be foolish to casually reveal information about a trump card just for a battle that wouldn't benefit us at all. Not only was she trying to prove something to me, it was also because this was a sealed-off world where information wouldn't be leaked. Finally, I'm able to stand by your side. I didn't know how to respond to Harloy's sudden words. However, Harloy suddenly jumped onto my shoulder. Princess Peach, if she uses force, will you be able to resist? My complex emotions instantly became even more difficult to understand. Chapter 609. The entire world of Hades was split into two. One side was a mountain of ice, while the other side was a sea of fire. I had already witnessed conservation's tricks many times before. There was nothing new about them. However, Eliza's abilities truly broadened my horizons. In all the planes, the ocean was the cradle of life for all carbon-based life forms. I never expected that the sea of fire in this world of fire would also be capable of nurturing life. I won't even mention the three gigantic beasts. Although they appeared quite domineering, it was obvious that they lacked their own intelligence. They were far weaker than the original main gods. If they weren't weaker in the slightest, Eliza would be able to easily defeat any main god. Amateurs would enjoy the show, while experts would appreciate the artistry. What truly astonished me was the seemingly inconspicuous sea of fire. The sea of lava slowly flowed due to the restrictions of the lava. However, the fire creatures that jumped out were all elemental creatures with their own souls. A fire phoenix suddenly flew out and streaked across the sky. The feathers it dropped were like bombs, and its size was already 4 to 5 times bigger than when it was born. The energy fluctuations it emitted were also more than 10 times stronger. The fire wolves were all self-destructing. However, more than twice the number of fire wolves jumped out of the sea of fire in the blink of an eye. Creation magic. At this level, it's no different from calling it creation. Back in the day, Eliza's understanding of magic had been different. In order to resist the summoning of her natural magic flames, she had also studied ice magic. She was skilled at using ice to create the shapes of animals, plants, and weapons. She could use this to deal physical damage. But now, perhaps she had given up on ice magic because she had responded to the summoning of her main god, but her astonishing talent in art and creativity had been transferred here. For her, this sea of fire was the source of life. She reached out her hands and clenched the air, causing the sea of fire to give birth to new life. Perhaps her entire army was suppressed by conservation's limitless mana. However, in terms of combat techniques and magical talent, she was at least on par with conservation. Meanwhile, conservation's combat style had obviously been set in stone. It would be incredibly difficult for her to improve any further. When considering the difference in age and experience, Eliza's accomplishments were even more valuable. Her combat style had reached the level of creation, which was truly ridiculous. Even I couldn't predict how far she would develop in the future. That's enough watching. Let's finish her off. In a way, I was relieved that Eliza had stepped out. Not only had she displayed her combat strength, but she had also shown us conservation's combat style and abilities through her battle. The person sitting here drinking tea and chatting with conservation wasn't an experienced veteran. While it seemed like she was just casually chatting and resting, she was actually using her own methods to gather information on powerful enemies. Every bit of information she learned would be incredibly useful in actual combat. Oh, I can't drink anymore. I really can't drink anymore. Hehe, I really can't drink anymore. Hehe, just now, Little Red was rolling on the ground while laughing and talking in her sleep. She definitely wasn't trying to slap my face. It was just a coincidence, a coincidence. We should understand a young girl's irresistible biological clock. Look, Adam was currently studying the information in his hands with a serious expression. The next second, Adam's idiotic face appeared in front of me as he crazily showed off to me the precious item he had obtained from the Chaos Abyss, the colorful special edition under the cover of his book. Roland, this special edition is truly wonderful. I really don't know how the fairies are so capable. A half-naked moon elf priest, a beastman leopard girl in a swimsuit, a dwarf cute shorts, a fiery demon queen of the abyss leather outfit. Marguerite, what are you doing? Put down Little Red. Ah. I was rendered speechless as I watched the farce before me. By the way, Little Red, you're really amazing for being able to fall asleep even now. And at this time, I didn't even need to do anything. With Marguerite swiftly suppressing them as always, it wouldn't take long for the veterans to prepare for battle. Adam was the first to be tossed out as cannon fodder for his job class. But judging from his flying speed, he was actually much faster than before. When he passed by the sea of flames, the power of fire around him enveloped him. The dense fire element transformed into a large flaming bird. He flapped his wings over the sea of flames, causing the bird to become twice as large. He managed to learn it. Even I was rather astonished to see this scene before me. Giving the Phoenix's heart to Anne was the equivalent of giving her everything he had accumulated in the past. Perhaps the thunder element of the Titan's heart wouldn't be any weaker than the Phoenix's heart in terms of power, but the martial arts techniques and concepts that came with the Phoenix of the East and Red Lotus hero were probably all useless now. Of course, I believed in Adam's abilities. It would only be a matter of time before he could learn a new set of martial arts techniques that came with the Titan's heart. But when considering the fact that he had to learn everything from the very beginning, that would be the equivalent of having a master of literature learn a new language from scratch. It would take several years or even several decades for him to reach his previous level of mastery. Why can't he learn it? We're no longer the grassroots that had to risk our lives just to obtain a Phoenix's heart. I paused in surprise upon hearing this. Indeed, back in the day, we had worked so hard to cause trouble for the Phoenix. We had chased and been chased for thousands of kilometers before we finally obtained the Phoenix's heart. But now, there was no need for that at all. I had the Mage Country's Truth Symposium help me out. With the support of the gods of the Hades faction, I went to the Nature faction and bought an old Phoenix that was about to undergo nirvana. Then, I had my teacher help me perform surgery on him. Now, he's a man with two hearts. Dual core drive. Doesn't that mean that he's about to officially have two hearts? I was shocked by what I had just said. Although it sounded simple to have two hearts, it wasn't difficult to imagine how difficult and troublesome it would be. Phoenixes were incredibly rare divine beasts. It was impossible to imagine how difficult it would be to purchase such a precious animal from the fervent Druil. And even if I managed to obtain a Phoenix, the safest method would still be to take out the Titan's heart and transplant the Phoenix's heart using the original blueprints. Why would I want to keep the Titan's heart? I didn't even need to mention the pain and conflict that would come from having two hearts. I had long since passed the age of pursuing chaotic power. What suited me the most was the best. Marguerite glanced at me. Fine, I felt that she was viciously glaring at me. He feels that he needs to become even stronger. I had a sudden realization. but didn't know what to say. The strongest warrior of humanity. The hero who saved the world several hundred years ago. In front of future powerful enemies, no, against powerful gods and main gods, he probably wouldn't even be enough. Although the Phoenix's phoenix flames were of the fire element, they contained undying, rebirth, and other attributes that were especially suitable for meat shields. The phoenix flames' destructive power and attack power were also quite high. However, they also had many shortcomings. The most obvious one was the most common weakness of metal cans, their short legs. Perhaps the phoenix's ability to fly was quite practical, but it still wouldn't be enough for the top-level battles. Adam's phoenix wings couldn't even compare to an immemorial red dragon flying at full speed. As for the lightning element, even without mentioning other attributes, just the fact that it could increase one's reaction speed was something that all warriors desired. If Adam had both the Titan's heart and the Phoenix's heart, his strength, speed, and rebirth would all reach the pinnacle under the effects of dual cause. Perhaps he would become a theoretically perfect warrior. That's too difficult. Roland was even able to balance 4 types of power, while I only have 2. It'll be fine. Weren't you the one who started this? I finally understood why Marguerite was glaring at me when I intentionally imitated Roland's intonation. However, these were actually 2 different things. I had accumulated this power over many lifetimes and then cultivated it myself. The most foundational part was that I was also a mage, while Adam was a pure warrior who was unable to naturally summon the power of the elements. Adam had forcefully obtained a bloodline through surgery. Even if he could use his phoenix's heart to suppress it, the conflict between the 2 elements would be the equivalent of placing 2 constantly exploding bombs in his body. Damage to his internal organs would become a daily occurrence. Until the balance was completely reached, even if he had the phoenix's power to regenerate and save his life, it would still be a common occurrence for him to suffer life-threatening pain. I'm cultivating this myself. I didn't manage to finish my explanation as I saw Marguerite's calm expression. I knew that the rest of my explanation would be meaningless. There was no need to waste my breath. Adam and the others had been famous for so many years already. How could they not understand such things? Before he made his decision, he had already resolved himself to face all consequences. We all knew that Adam's words were nothing more than an excuse. His true reason was that he felt that he wasn't strong enough, and wanted to become stronger. All of his words were useless. For a pure warrior, wanting to become stronger was enough. Marguerite was purely venting her anger on me. Overcoming the conflict between elements, creating a lightning element martial art technique and concept, and improving his phoenix's heart to its previous level. Every single one of these would be difficult obstacles that any ordinary warrior would never be able to overcome in their entire lives. But if it was Roland, perhaps he would one day laugh foolishly and say that he was invincible. Why did this feel so subtly familiar? The phoenix in the sky was now covered in thunderstorms. That unyielding phoenix now had wings of lightning on its back, and it flew even faster in the sky. It was just like an unstoppable bolt of lightning. I could only helplessly shake my head. Since the meat shield was charging forward on his own, I shouldn't waste any more time. I didn't know when, but Little Red had already vanished without a trace. Judging from how the phoenix suddenly shot countless small fireballs at conservation, I had already slowed down by half a beat. When did Little Red jump onto the phoenix? Judging from how conservation's attack on Adam had suddenly vanished, Little Red's evolution as an energy-devouring rainbow dragon meant that she now had the ability to devour mana. At this moment, Marguerite was floating in the sky. Her rainbow-colored philosopher's stone floated in the air as countless spells jumped out from it. Support spells such as Speed Boost and Astral Armor were thrown at me, while support spells such as Speed Decrease and Curse of Misfortune were thrown at the enemy. As a saint, Marguerite knew at least 1,000 spells. She really is the same as before. Originally, Eliza's combat strength wasn't part of my calculations. Yet, I dared to challenge the main god conservation because we had more people on our side. What I meant was that our abilities had long since reached the point where 1 + 1 was greater than 3 after working together for so many years. When facing a powerful enemy, Adam would block the enemy, Marguerite would observe and gather information on the enemy and provide support, and Little Red would seize any opportunity to ambush me. As for me, as I was a multifaceted person, I would always make up for my weaknesses. And in the current battle situation, what I should be doing the most was, my golden wings glowed with a golden light. I raised my right arm, which was grasped by holy light. My dawn holy sword glowed with a blinding light. My powerful holy sword even attracted the attention of the gods of Hades. And then, I reached out, holy light. Holy light flashed on Adam's body as I healed him. I meant, cast a healing spell on him. Cough, my team now had a tank, DPS, and support, but no healer. Since I could use holy light, it was only natural that I would be the backline healer, right? Don't underestimate healers. It was precisely because of healers that it was possible for intelligent humanoid creatures to work together in small teams to challenge enemies at a higher level than themselves. As long as the tank was able to tank and the healer was the main healer, as long as no one died, we would eventually win. No matter how powerful a boss was, it would still be afraid of a team raid. Healers were the foundational reason why this iron triangle would be able to kill a boss. Every single holy knight wants to be a DPS. But in the end, due to reality, most become healers. The great majority of adventuring teams lacked healers the most. Usually, only novice priests who needed experience would join the adventuring team. In that case, whenever a teammate was injured, the Holy Light Knight would become the only hope. In such a reality, many young people who originally wanted to become adventurers would unknowingly become full-time healers. Their swordsmanship would gradually become inferior to their healing skills, and they wouldn't even know what to do on the front lines. In the end, they would mysteriously become a healer for the rest of their lives. This was definitely not from my personal experience. Cough, cough, at the very least, my healing was effective for now. With my Holy Light Sword's buff, the healing effects of my Holy Light spell were almost instantaneous. Adam's recovery abilities were incredibly high to begin with, so he was able to instantly recover from any injuries. Plus, Little Red was constantly devouring Conservation's mana attacks. Together with Marguerite's support spells, Adam was able to close in on Conservation with 3 of us protecting one. And as a pure mage, being able to get close to a warrior meant death. Chapter 610. While Roland was still dealing with his own problems, the entire world was still spinning. When news about the Holy War from the lower planes spread, it was the equivalent of the Holy War sounding. The entire world was in an uproar. The Holy War's main battlefield is in the Elven Kingdom, in the Moonwheel capital. The fairies were the most professional information merchants in the world. They didn't actively leak this information. The reason why this information was able to spread so quickly was because the moment the Elven Empress received this information, her heart almost stopped beating. She unhesitatingly asked the Silver Elves for a ceasefire and requested reinforcements from all neighboring and allied countries. Some people questioned the authenticity of this information. While the Moon Elf Silver Dagger was still covered in the power of chaos, and the Archmages confirmed that this ordinary dagger had already passed through multiple dimensional doors, many things were revealed to the world. His Highness Roland obtained this information and decided to tell you through us. For this matter, he fought against main god Donates and killed 2 high-level devils, the Lord of Curses, Lasnina, and the Blood General, Sailor. The fairies were quite honest, but they had no choice but to believe this chain of important information. Previously, when news of Anslo being ambushed and heavily injured was spread, everyone, including Anslo himself, was dumbfounded. An undying main god wouldn't attack without sufficient benefits. Anslo had been inconceivably low-key ever since he joined the Chaos Abyss. Why would they attack him? It would have been understandable if it was only the Abyss Prince who nobody could predict. However, Sophocles the Deceiver was famous for not acting unless he saw a rabbit. Only tremendous benefits would make him move. Previously, all of the Moon Elf tacticians, mags, and nobles had been racking their brains. Now, the answer had been revealed. What hurt them the most was their hearts and livers. It was said that several of the most senior elders of families with thousands of years of history had fainted on the spot. Is fate going to destroy the Moon Elves? No, the entire elven species. Communication between major countries was quite quick. Once all the superior elves started acting, The elves received a flurry of responses from neighboring countries in less than 3 days. Orland's Empress Rosemary and the Bardi Empire's Emperor both met with our ambassadors. They also sympathize with our situation, but they all said that if we want reinforcements, we'll have to wait until they defeat their current enemies. As an important faction in the mortal plane, the Moon Elves had embassies in all the mega empires. That was why they always caused so much trouble. The elves' secret techniques allowed them to act swiftly. The first batch of replies would likely be the most important. The Ottoman Empire and Bardi Empire were quite polite. At the very least, they sent high-level ambassadors to meet the Moon Elves. However, it would be difficult to say how sincere they were. After all, these two empires' enemies were undead emperors and the Seafolk empires. How many years would it take before they could send reinforcements? Since it was certain that they wouldn't be with Elven Empire reinforcements. With they could with Emon with. The Elf Empire with Emoff with. San Antonio didn't meet with our ambassadors. They said that their emperor is busy preparing for the hunting season and will only be able to meet with our ambassadors in about 3 months. This year's hunting season has only ended 2 months ago. Those bastards intend to prepare for an entire year. This was already quite shameless, but it was still a bit lacking compared to the next topic. The Swolo Federation says that this year is an election year. Yep, even if it's a holy war, they have no intention of cancelling elections. The factions that we're supporting say that it's fine if they want to send reinforcements, but they need to triple the amount of donations this year. Only then will they have the confidence to steal more than half of the seats from the Doves. That way, they'll be able to pass some of the more radical proposals. The Swolo Federation was one of the few mega empires that had both a federal system and an electoral system. Other countries had always viewed the Swolo Federation's political system as strange. Now that war was right before their eyes, they were still busy with elections, which made it even more incomprehensible. Isn't it already the Holy War? Why is the Doves, peace faction, doing so well in their elections? Because the citizens don't want to fight. You think you can stop fighting just because you don't want to. Others invade your home, kill your parents and family, and steal away your wealth, and you're just going to watch. Not only the elves, even the human countries didn't understand what was going on. However, it was unlikely that the elves would be able to receive any donations this time. Even if the elves successfully obtained half of the seats in the nobles' parliament and started a war proposal, the elves probably wouldn't be able to wait until the next year, even if everything went smoothly. In the past, the Swolo Federation's political system was full of loopholes, which gave the elves many opportunities. The elves' beautiful image among the citizens could even help the politicians win votes. It could be said that the Swolo Federation was the most friendly to the elves out of all the human countries. But now, the elves who had praised the Swolo Federation's advanced system now deeply hated the Swolo Federation's political system. Perhaps it's better to have a dictatorship in a time of war. At the very least, a single sentence will be enough to solve the problem. Don't be foolish. If you're a dictator, the entire country is your wealth. How are you supposed to trick him into paying such a huge price for other countries' matters? And what about the other mega empires' responses? The Amelia Kingdom that had the sea god guards. The Amelia Kingdom was located in the southwestern part of the Asia continent. The Amelia Kingdom was indeed quite strong in naval battles, but in land battles. Most importantly, the elves had never even tried to establish diplomatic relations with the Amelia Kingdom. That was because the elves were the Swolo Federation's mortal enemies, and also because the elves were too far away. They had no interest in the overall political situation of the continent. The Mage Country that had the Cloud City. The Mage Country was indeed the country with the best conditions to send reinforcements. However, it was clearly conditions, not possibility. While the Archmages and the Cloud Tower would indeed send reinforcements the fastest, when considering how the elves didn't have a particularly friendly relationship with the Mags, it was almost impossible for the elves to send reinforcements. When all the mega empires used all sorts of reasons and methods to reject the Moon Elf royalty's request for reinforcements, the Moon Elves still panicked even though this was within their expectations. But there was also some good news among all the bad news. For example, the Silver Elves had agreed to a ceasefire, and it was even possible that they would send reinforcements. What? The Silver Elves split up? Yes, Your Majesty. The next morning, I received bad news. Unlike what Roland had expected, the Silver Elves and Moon Elves' internal conflict wasn't purely a fake fight. Anslo and the other elven gods had decided that the victor of this battle for the elven throne would indeed become the new elf royalty. In order to survive this calamity, it's time for the elves to unite. In a corner that humans couldn't see, the superior elves leaders had already come to an agreement to unite. Alright then, considering that the wood elves were all hiding deep in the mountains, and the dark elves had long since become mortal enemies with the other elves, the only elves that would be able to unite and decide who would rule over all the elves would be the Moon Elves and the Silver Elves. The valiant Silver Elves and the wise Moon Elves all desired to lead their entire species. Even the gods behind them were now divided. Although 70% of this internal battle was for outsiders to see, 30% of it was actually a battle to decide who the true royalty would be. In order to prevent the elves from losing too many elites before the Holy War, the elven gods supervised both sides and restricted the superior elves from participating in the battle. They also intentionally kept the elites of their species far away from the battlefield. The end result was that the mercenaries and ordinary elves fought to the death, while the superior elves could only command from above. This internal conflict had been going on for 7 or 8 years. Even though the higher-ups of both sides began to intentionally control the scale of the battle, both sides still suffered heavy losses. This time, the Silver Elves and Moon Elves suddenly came to an agreement. The Silver Elves even wanted to send reinforcements to the Moon Elves. Perhaps this could be explained as for the sake of the entire species or for the sake of the entire species, but to the ordinary elven soldiers who had been fighting on the front lines, this was a blatant betrayal. What? They killed my family, and I'm supposed to go save them? What a joke. This was no longer the ancient generation where the hierarchy system was extremely strict. The superior elves indeed occupied the core of the elven species due to their outstanding natural talents and historical inheritance. However, the superior elves' reproductive abilities were even worse than ordinary elves, which meant that they had to give up much of their authority to the ordinary elves. As time passed, it was no longer the ordinary elves who had the advantage in terms of numbers and combat strength. However, in this elven country where the gods guided and followed the traditional system, the superior elves were still the superior elves. The Silver Elves were currently in a state of internal conflict. Originally, the Silver Elves had been skilled in combat and had been able to firmly control their armies. However, the absence of the Silver Elves' direct descendants in this internal conflict had already caused the non-Silver Elven commanders to be filled with complaints. Now, not only did the Silver Elves directly refuse to come to an agreement, they even wanted to fight for the enemy from yesterday. No matter how one looked at it, this was a form of betrayal. We've been betrayed by our king. Not only did the non-Silver Elven warriors feel this way, many younger Silver Elf commanders were also unable to accept this reality. They were already filled with anger at being treated as cowards for not being able to fight on the battlefield, so they directly led their personal guards and broke off all relations with the Silver Elves. Without even mentioning the process, this was a true internal conflict. But in the end, the Silver Elf leaders still maintained their authority. The Silver Elves didn't start an internal conflict. Instead, they completely broke off from the Silver Elves. Only about 40% of the Silver Elf army was willing to follow the Silver Elves' conservative faction to support the Moon Elves. The remaining Silver Elves, including most of the Silver Elf commoners and younger Silver Elves, all felt that it would be a good idea for the entire Silver Elf species to move far away from the battle and retreat to the southwestern mountains. This time, the Silver Elves who had been scheming against the Silver Elves had screwed up yet again. Meanwhile, perhaps the Silver Elf gods felt that they had gone too far before as they continued to maintain their abnormal silence. Perhaps this was because looking at things from a different perspective, the Silver Elves felt that this was yet another smart decision that they wouldn't lose out regardless of whether they won or lost. Even if the entire Moon Elf species was destroyed, the Silver Elves would still be able to continue existing. Perhaps, judging the Silver Elves in the cruelest way possible, The Silver Elves should be hoping for the entire Moon Elf species to be destroyed. In that case, only the Silver Elves would be able to lead the entire Elven species in the next generation. However, this was like a bolt from the blue to the Moon Elf Empress. She felt as if she could already hear the death knell for the entire Elven species. Chapter 6:11. This was a desolate battlefield. Even though both sides had tacitly stayed away from the only buildings here, the land here was still covered in countless moon craters. Every inch of land here had been baptized by magic countless times. Black undead crawled out of the black soil and answered Roland's summons to return to the battlefield. However, in this pure land where there were no corpses, these seemingly ordinary skeleton soldiers were actually nothing more than puppets created from the aura of death. These puppets didn't have souls attached to them. Not only did they consume twice as much mana, but they were far inferior to the lowest level goblin corpses when it came to necromancy. Dawn, cleanse them. All I needed to do was raise my holy light sword, and the light of cleansing would instantly shatter these artificial skeletons. Not only that, the tower in the distance that was faintly glowing with holy light would also give me power. I hope that Roland doesn't have good eyesight and doesn't notice that I've changed his hammer into a sword. At this point in the battle, my main role had unknowingly become to support the undead. With Eliza and Little Red's attack abilities, as well as Marguerite's numerous support spells, rather than using my myth-rank power to attack, it would be far better to focus on healing and support the undead. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Under my holy light, large numbers of artificial undead instantly died the moment they awoke. Perhaps the Holy Church would call this a high-level divine art, divine sacrifice. But for me, I didn't even need to construct a divine ART's model. All I had to do was let my holy light display its own characteristics, and these artificial undead would naturally be chased away. Due to the difference in power between us, my holy light, which had the advantage of being able to attack later, was actually suppressed. Some artificial undead still managed to survive. However, I didn't care. Would these low-level undead really be able to threaten these powerful individuals who were at least at the semigod level? I was rather eager to see how things would turn out. Conservation was no idiot or newbie. Of course, she wouldn't have summoned these skeletons just to add to the fun of the battle. As expected, the next instant, the black skeletons began to change. The low-level skeletons crashed into each other. Their skeletons scattered as they crashed into each other, but they swiftly gathered together, just like a dense colony of ants crawling all over the ground. Soon, huge white bone giants crawled up from the ground. Every part of their bodies was a collection of countless low-level skeletons. This seemed to be the habit of ordinary necromancers, but it was fundamentally different. The bones of necromancers were pieced together and stitched together. It was just the fusion of organs and flesh. Different organs had soul fragments of completely different origins attached to them. Naturally, it was impossible to completely fuse them together. 1 + 1 was less than 2, 100 + 100 was less than 150, and 1,000 + 1,000 was still more than 1,000. Otherwise, a simple accumulation would be enough to create a giant monster that surpassed all existences. Super undead creatures required top-notch materials. Even if the energy level of low-level undead creatures was stacked up, the materials would not be able to bear it and directly collapse. Meanwhile, Conservation's artificial skeletons had been piled together into a bone giant. Every single bone giant was purely artificial. There weren't any of the most important factors to consider when creating a large-scale undead construct. It was as if Conservation had created a set of meticulously crafted building blocks. All it took was a simple assembly for them to perfectly fit together. Bone giants appeared out of nowhere. Their energy levels ranged from gold to myth rank, but we could sense that they were all complete individuals. Conservation is truly amazing with this technology. Not only was Harloise's eyes glowing with light, even I was interested in this technology. I had originally thought that I had forced the undead emperors to the point where they didn't have any more summoned creatures. Yet, it was now possible to create magical artificial skeletons that could then be used as a foundation to create high-level undead. Some of these bone giants were like wild beasts, constantly roaring. Some flew into the sky and transformed into bee swarms or bone-winged dragons. Some charged forward like tanks. I believed that if it wasn't for the fact that I had dispelled most of the undead, semigod-level undead creatures would have been created from these building blocks. It was likely that only Conservation, who had plenty of mana to spend as much as she wanted, would be able to do something like this. If I had this technology, I wouldn't need to create completely artificial undead. All I would need to do is replace the connected parts with artificial skeletons, which would greatly reduce the internal conflicts between organs. No, that would actually be a waste. I could use artificial skeletons as the core skeleton and nervous system, and then choose the appropriate organs to strengthen. Pure warriors would only be able to see how effective this trump card would be on the battlefield. However, I could see that this would be a revolutionary improvement for undead magic. This was definitely an unprecedented invention. Even without mentioning how much it would improve undead magic, just the fact that it didn't need corpses as a material was enough to change the entire undead world. I absolutely must obtain this technology. Just as I was about to burn with passion, Marguerite suddenly teleported next to me and said, "It's about time." I calculated the time and felt that it was indeed about time, so I nodded. The next instant, Adam flew back with Little Red, and Eliza appeared behind me. Snap. With a snap of my fingers, we returned to that shabby Chaos Abyss hotel. It was as if the cruel battlefield from just a second ago had been nothing more than an illusion. What was the most difficult thing to accept for a boss that had to stay in a dungeon? Was it the enemy's excellent teamwork and disgusting healer to fight a battle of attrition? Was it the fact that the enemy clearly had the power to fight a direct battle, but instead chose to fight a battle of attrition? Was it the fact that all you could do was sit on your throne and watch as the enemy finished killing your subordinates, while you discussed your strategy below the stage? I believed that the most disgusting thing of all was that no matter how much of an advantage you obtained, the enemy would instantly return to the dungeon, even if they died, and then return at full health for a second, third, fourth, and so on, for the 27th time. That's right, this was the 27th time we fought. I didn't have that many special privileges in the world of Hades. However, I was only able to bring people in and out of the dungeon as I pleased. As long as I used this properly, that would be my greatest advantage. Conservation had relied on her incomplete undead body to reach main god level. Just thinking about it made me feel that it had been a difficult journey. I respected her astonishing willpower and natural talent, and I didn't intend to cause our side to lose members for the sake of a trapped Conservation. That was why I used the most shameless tactic of all, intending to use the least amount of manpower to exhaust Conservation. The moment we returned, Adam was sprawled on the carpet, panting heavily without any regard for his image. Little Red was holding a large vat of water, and it seemed that she had been breathing so hard that smoke was coming out of her throat. Wait a moment, where did she scam such good wine from? Perhaps it was Marguerite, who was the only one I didn't have to worry about. She sat off to the side and recorded Conservation's power level and trump cards, as well as the weaknesses that we exposed in battle. Honestly, you actually have an undead main god as your sparring partner. That's so ridiculous. That's right, since we had a team, we naturally needed to spar with each other. Our goal was indeed to improve our teamwork in battle. We needed to understand each other's current abilities and combat habits through battle. It had been far too long since our team had fought together, or perhaps it would be more accurate to say that we hadn't met an opponent that we needed to cooperate with. Now that we had such an excellent sparring partner, we naturally needed to use her as much as possible. I felt that Conservation was probably in a bad mood right now. Our thoughts were all there for everyone to see. Not only were all of her trump cards revealed one by one, her abilities were also no longer a secret. She was defeated, and humiliatingly defeated by a group of opponents who were individually weaker than her. It was only a matter of time before she lost. After we finished fighting, we could eat, sleep, and rest. However, Conservation would need to clean up the mess and prepare for the next battle. If we were at a disadvantage or had a sufficient advantage, we could easily retreat. However, Conservation would need to persist to her absolute limit. If it wasn't for the fact that her mana seemed to be limitless, she would have likely lost long ago. After fighting so many battles, I had more or less figured out the truth behind why her mana was limitless. You intend to grind a main god to death just like that? Of course, even if she still has mana, her stamina and mental energy will also have their limits. Both of us are at different levels of tension. She doesn't have any teammates, so she'll need to constantly be on her toes. As her concentration drops, it'll only be a matter of time before she reveals a fatal opening. There were some things that I didn't say out loud. Only by slowly forcing conservation to her absolute limit would she reveal even more of her trump cards. As a powerful individual who had become famous even before modern human society, conservation had accumulated quite a bit of knowledge. Just that artificial skeleton from earlier would be enough for me to research for several decades. 4 mags, a critical research result would be far more tempting than any treasure that could be obtained from a monster. Every time conservation revealed her trump cards, Harloy's and I would benefit greatly. Perhaps it was still impossible for us to understand how conservation was able to accomplish such a feat. However, we often collected samples and research methods, as well as the foundational magical knowledge that Asso had left behind for me in the Undead Republic, which provided us with a direction in which to restore conservation's power. As long as we truly defeated conservation, we would naturally be able to learn all of her secrets. Another benefit I obtained was probably the Dawn Holy Sword at my waist. Not only did my holy sword not show any signs of being overly exhausted, it even seemed to be replenished as it became more and more effective. I drank some water and wiped my mouth. It was about time to end our break. You've rested enough. Let's continue for 28 matches. This time, Adam and I will act as the vanguard and give her more pressure. If she focuses all her attacks on me, I'll teleport out and then come back. You don't need to worry too much about her. Marguerite, duplicate more cannon fodder and stall conservation's summoned creatures. Little Red, Eliza, are you still able to use that magic fusion spell from earlier? Perhaps even more disgusting than an unkillable meat shield would be a meat shield that would automatically teleport away after a certain amount of damage was dealt. As we made all sorts of battle strategies, the weaknesses that we revealed would either be fixed in time, or our companions would make up for them. Our combat strength was truly increasing, and before I knew it, I seemed to have become the team leader of this team again. Take it easy. Don't force her too much. It's so rare to have such an excellent opponent. Let's do our best to fight a full 100 matches. Chapter 6:12. No matter how you look at it, it's impossible for conservation to have limitless mana. I started explaining my analysis of conservation's abilities in a nonsensical manner. However, the other mags all listened quite seriously to me. First of all, theoretically speaking, limitless mana was the equivalent of creating something from nothing. That was the creator goddess's completely unreasonable power level. But from a different standpoint, if conservation truly had limitless mana, she could simply cast an infinite number of forbidden spells to wipe out the entire chaos abyss. Why would she go through so much trouble? Just thinking about it made me think of countless tactics that could wipe out all existences. For example, she could create an infinite number of artificial bone giants. Even if she couldn't create enough bone giants to instantly kill a semigod, she could still overwhelm everything with an infinite number of bone giants. Considering the fact that she hadn't reached main god level yet before we fought, perhaps she received a revelation from me during our fight. That time, I defeated her by using a sealed space and creating the law of energy conservation so that all the energy she stole would return to her body. During our 30th fight, we increased the intensity of our attacks, forcing her to constantly summon cannon fodder and use powerful magic to save herself. Through Marguerite's records, we were able to calculate conservation's mana output with a simple magic wave chart. This confirmed that there was a fixed upper limit to conservation's total mana output. Should I say that as expected of a main god level mage? This number is truly ridiculous, but it's still acceptable. This upper limit was approximately 12 times that of the pure mage Marguerite, who had the highest mana output among us. Eliza was a demon, so her mana output wasn't that high. This was also conservation's maximum mana output. That was the total amount of cannon fodder and attack spells she could control at any one time. No matter how much we forced her afterwards, she never exceeded this limit. Since there's a limit, it can't possibly be a true upper limit. In that case, there are only two possibilities. The first is that her mana is recovering at an incredibly high rate, almost limitless. If that was really the case, it would actually be no different from truly having unlimited mana. However, the probability of this happening was far too low. Recovering mana had always been the biggest headache for mags. It was already common knowledge among mags that the physical body needed rest and meditation in order to recover mana. Recovering mana was even faster than using mana, which was somewhat unacceptable. And so, on the 31st exchange, Marguerite cast Mana Shackle, Harlois cast Dullness Curse, and Eliza cast Mana Burn. These were all spells that had special effects on mags and affected their mana regeneration. 5 minutes after the 31st duel, Conservation still hadn't gotten rid of her debuffs. She was still using the same amount of mana as before. Her mana regeneration ability had been reduced, which didn't affect her ability to use mana at all. In that case, Conservation would no longer have the option of having an incredibly strong mana regeneration ability. I heaved a sigh of relief when I reached this conclusion. The second possibility is that she's constantly maintaining a state of conservation around herself. No matter how much mana she uses up, that mana will always return to her physical body as the spell disappears. Although this didn't seem any different, as if she still had unlimited mana, as long as I knew the theory behind this, I would naturally be able to use a countermeasure. For the 33rd duel, let's fight somewhere else. I need to test something. We left the city and found a desolate location. This duel ended even faster. I only managed to come into contact with some of her undead creations, and then teleported them out of the world of Hade. Even though I had purposely chosen a semigod rank undead creature, under our combined attacks, it was only able to last a minute or so. Furthermore, this semigod rank undead creature was no longer in the same world as its master, yet it was still able to self-destruct its magic. Next up was the 34th duel. This duel ended just as quickly. We only managed to determine Conservation's maximum mana output before retreating. How was it? Her maximum mana output decreased by about 1/17. This is the first time she's ever lowered her mana output. Your guess was correct. She used a special method to return all the mana she used up to her maximum mana output. I nodded in satisfaction. At this point, Conservation's greatest trump card had been revealed. Perhaps we still didn't know how she did it, but now we knew how to deal with her. For the 35th duel, we managed to bring out 8 gigantic undead beasts. Conservation's maximum mana output decreased by the 1st of July. For the 39th duel, Conservation only had 2/3 of her mana output left. She stopped summoning undead creatures. Since she lacked cannon fodder, we closed in on her, and Adam cut off one of her right hands. Starting from the 42nd duel, she began to furiously toss out all sorts of forbidden spells and high-level magic. Meanwhile, I began attempting to transfer my magic out of this world as an item. During the 47th match, I succeeded in my attempt to transfer Conservation's mana to me under Adam's and the others' protection. Although the success rate of transferring Conservation's mana to me wasn't very high, only about 15% every time I successfully transferred Conservation's mana to me, her mana pool would instantly decrease. For the 50th duel, after practicing many times, my transfer success rate was now over 30%. The wasteland that we had chosen to teleport to was now nothing more than rubble from all sorts of offensive spells. For the 53rd duel, Conservation's total mana output was less than 1/5 of her peak. It seemed that victory was right before us. We had defeated a main god without using any mana output. It seemed that we were about to make history. For the 55th duel, Conservation suddenly tossed out a brown crown magic spell. All of us failed to block it. Adam, who had blocked the attack for me, was instantly killed. If it wasn't for the fact that he had enough HP to survive in time, he would likely have died. It seemed that we had become numb to Conservation's performance. She still had an ace up her sleeve to turn the tables. But next time, we would be even more careful and not give her any chances. In order to allow Adam to recover, we rested for an entire day before the 56th duel. This gave Conservation a chance to take a breather. For the 56th duel, Conservation definitely hadn't recovered more than 1/10 of her mana. Our inference was further confirmed. Conservation's mana recovery abilities weren't particularly strong. Her limitless mana relied on her ability to rapidly recover mana that she used up. For the 60th duel, Conservation's total mana output was now even lower than Marguerite's. She made a fatal mistake, and Adam successfully took revenge on her. She was now nailed to her throne. However, she unhesitatingly used her mana to self-destruct. She silently looked at us, intending to take us down with her. And so, we directly teleported out of this duel. She seemed to have stopped. For the 61st duel, Conservation's mana output had already dropped to the level of a semigod. She was soon forced to her limits. She was stabbed in the waist, and chose to self-destruct yet again. For the 62nd duel, Conservation prepared to self-destruct right at the start of the duel. Was she using her actions to express her determination to choose death? For the 67th duel, Conservation's soul core suffered permanent damage due to her self-destruct. It seemed that she was already beginning to drop in power level. Her mana output was now so low that it didn't even need to be calculated. For the 68th duel, I told her right from the start that with her current mana output, even if she self-destructed, she wouldn't be able to fatally wound us. That would be nothing more than a meaningless death, the most shameful form of suicide. I told her that for an undead mage, death wouldn't be the end. As long as she died, I would use a soul-searching spell to extract all the secrets of her soul. For the 72nd duel, Conservation no longer had any mana left. When I approached her, she actually jumped up from the ground like a wild dog and bit me. She even left teeth marks on my arm. And so, I found a doghouse to store her in, and even prepared a dog leash for her. In the end, I didn't fight more than 100 duels. In Yungye City's magical prison, I obtained a main god-level undead emperor who had used up all of her mana. I was considering connecting her to my mage tower's mana source and using countless tubes to absorb every last bit of her mana. Perhaps soon, this mobile city would have a mana source that would never be used up. While I was humming a pub song as I cleaned up the battlefield, there were people discussing this in low voices behind me. He actually managed to take down a main god without any losses. That's Roland's fighting style. Yes, that's Roland Yungye, the merciless and highly effective strategist of the battlefield. Chapter 613. From the moment that Conservation's fate restricted her to the land of Hades, her defeat and death had already been determined. I had previously given her a chance to resolve our differences peacefully. I even gave her some research resources and authority over Yungye City so that she could have a place to live. This was also the equivalent of me voluntarily showing my goodwill. Actually, I wasn't the only one showing my goodwill to Conservation. I would always leave her some leeway so that we could meet again in the future. If I could get along well with Conservation, I would have one more ace up my sleeve when negotiating with the Undead Republic in the future. Actually, the senators of the Tark Republic that my spies knew didn't have that much of a grudge against me. Even though Asso had died because of me, in their minds, Asso's death had been glorious. The senators viewed death quite lightly for the sake of reviving the Tark Republic. In fact, they even acknowledged me as a junior who had forced their seniors to sacrifice themselves. Only by doing this can one be called an undead emperor. Due to Asso's final legacy, I discovered that the ordinary high-level undead in the Forest of Dreams even acknowledged me as an undead emperor. It was just that I was the emperor of the enemy. In fact, some undead even viewed me as Asso's successor, someone who should inherit Asso's legacy. This was the undead's world. Power was highly valued, and there was a strict hierarchy. If Asso's corpse-eating disciple didn't prove that he was stronger than me, then his status as Asso's successor wouldn't be acknowledged in the undead world. I didn't have any enmity towards the undead. I even felt some sympathy and admiration towards the senators who still cherished the past and insisted on rebuilding their countries. However, when so many countries and species were fighting over living space, personal preferences were meaningless. I wasn't foolish enough to become a martyr for peace. Right now, the undead army and the human kingdoms were at war with each other. Both sides had no intention of stopping at all for living space. And when both sides couldn't bear the losses of war, Perhaps I, as Aso's successor and the strongest undead emperor of the new generation, would be a suitable mediator. I can find a new mortal plane for you. It's a rich new land that can be used to rebuild your Tark Republic. Offering the Land of Spring as an alternative was my greatest expression of sincerity, especially after I learned that Aso and the others wanted to revive a country where the living and the dead could coexist. However, I also knew that the undead emperors only cared about Aishi's homeland right now. Only after the Undead Republic confirmed that Aishi wouldn't return would the undead emperors truly consider my sincerity. I took the initiative to express my friendliness. Naturally, I hoped that I would receive a friendly response. I was quite satisfied that conservation could become a bridge between us. However, when she betrayed our alliance on the battlefield and decided to ally with the devils to kill me, there was no longer any possibility of reconciliation between us. I wasn't a saint who would stick out the right side of my face after being slapped on the left. Nor did I intend to step into the same pit twice. Once everyone was gathered, the first thing I did was deal with this potential trouble. At most, I could communicate with the other undead emperors. Perhaps it would be much easier to communicate with them than this insane woman. In that case, once conservation lost her role as a bridge to the Tark Republic, she would probably only have her own value. Kill her. That would be impossible. It would be far too difficult to completely kill a main god-level existence. Not to mention, high-level mags would have plenty of tricks up their sleeves to escape death. Since her soulfire was extinguished here, it was highly likely that a new soulfire would be ignited somewhere else. Considering that her soul was bound to this place, it was highly likely that her new physical body would be revived here or forcefully transferred to where her soul was. However, there was still a chance that she would escape. I didn't want to take such a risk. Even if she was reborn as a skeleton soldier, an even more powerful undead emperor would return in less than 100 years. Even if I wasn't afraid of trouble myself, I still had to think about my descendants. What? I was thinking too much. With my luck, it would be impossible for me to have descendants, I would definitely have a wife and descendants. Even the evil intentions of the world wouldn't be able to stop me. At most, I would find a foster son. Cough, cough. Getting back on topic, the only practical way to deal with someone as troublesome as conservation would be to seal her away like how I had dealt with the Lord of Curses, forcing her to sleep for tens of thousands of years. But before I could make up for my losses, I wouldn't allow her to sleep so easily. This would be completely different from exchanging research information on equal terms. Now that conservation was in my hands, how could I possibly be satisfied if she didn't give me all of her research results? As for the final reason, fine, this was at least 50%. I admitted that I wasn't confident in being able to seal away a main god. While the seal of the 4 elements was indeed quite powerful, there were far too few main gods. There were no clear examples of successfully sealing away a main god. A seal would be just as sturdy as an iron lock. No matter how advanced the seal's design was, its sturdiness would depend on the creator's abilities and materials. If I really wanted to seal away a main god semi-permanently, I would have to prepare an even better 4-element god equipment. That would be quite a large investment, and I would have to wait until I reached semigod rank. From a certain standpoint, main gods were truly troublesome. Not only would it be difficult for them to completely die, it would be a huge problem if they escaped. It would be difficult to deal with them. However, in history, it seemed that only main gods had died in battle. There had never been anyone who had been captured alive. This was especially true for low-level main gods. No matter how I dealt with main gods, it wouldn't be good, but it also wouldn't be wrong. Let's first take a look at how top-level mags are treated. Mags would be useless if they didn't have any mana. It would be quite simple to create a mana pool that would extract a mage's mana. The mage country had long since punished mags who committed crimes. The mana extraction room and mana pipes would make it so that the mage wouldn't be able to accumulate any mana at all. Let's not comment on those mana pipes. Isn't that a dog leash on her neck? She even drew a 2-headed dog that doesn't look like anything. Are you afraid that your dog will get lost? The anti-magic hoop on her neck was something that Margaret had specially prepared for her. I happily reinforced her eternal ice which contained many secrets. Worried that she would be depressed, I even drew the images of my two most adorable twin-headed dogs, Little Treasure and Little Beckham, on the hoop. I was truly too kind, treating my captives far too well. Look at her expression. She definitely wants to kill you at all costs. No, she probably wants to die together with you. I'm used to it. All those fellows that I imprisoned in the underground prison back in the day were like that. As for other dirty methods that would be highly effective against prisoners, I really didn't need to tell others about my experience of building a dungeon under my residence to obtain fate points. Eliza was already making preparations. I suddenly felt that it was a good thing that Eliza was here. At the very least, she would help me with many things. Ahum, that was all for conservation. Time would prove everything. Our next target is the sun god Aloyo. He should be in the 372nd level of the Chaos Abyss. I still hadn't forgotten why I had come to the Chaos Abyss in the first place. Although the devils and demons had provoked me several times, the most important thing for me right now was to complete my myth-ranked weapon as soon as possible so that I could reach the peak of my power level in order to deal with the future. After so many years of accumulation, I now possessed the strongest bloodline ability in all of history. I was looking forward to seeing just how far I would be able to go. Aloyo? Who's that? The ancient Zion people worshipped the supreme sun god. However, that species went extinct in a holy war over 20,000 years ago. Surprisingly, although most people didn't know Aloyo's name, Marguerite did. Could it be that the mage country still had records of Aloyo after such a long period of time? As long as it existed, there will always be records. That species is rather special. Those eagle-headed ancient Zion people had many accomplishments in calendar and astronomy. Our current star charts are all based on their accomplishments. Also, their language directly refers to the sun as Aloyo. How could I possibly forget that? I had even forgotten that Marguerite was probably the only one out of all of us who could use prophecy and divination magic. Meanwhile, the ancient Zion people loved to talk about astronomical phenomena. They would say that a meteor would be some sort of calamity, or that 2 black spots on the sun would require mortals to perform a blood sacrifice. At any rate, I had never heard of anyone prophesying anything good. I suddenly felt that the stars in the sky were quite pitiful. They would become the symbol of the end of the world just by putting on makeup or having a black spot. They would become the symbol of destruction even though they were countless light years away. Not only did people always drag me around to talk about things, how could they possibly finish talking about so many mortals and all sorts of random things with just a few blinks? How simple would that be? Right, it was said that light came from the stars over a long period of time. In that case, the flashes of light that stargazers saw were all from many years ago. How many years ago was it possible for a stargazer to prophesy about trivial matters that had nothing to do with them? How boring was that? Cough, I meant that the stars had the ability to prophesy as well. You're being biased. We gold elves are also skilled in divination. Divination is an incredibly profound magic that requires incredibly high talent. It's something that you'll never be able to touch in your entire life. And, the prophecies of calamity are made in order to avoid the worst possible outcome. Harlois was infuriated for some reason. Just what had I done to offend her this time? I was the one who made the prophecy that my species would be destroyed. Reality has proven that my prophecy was correct. Her voice became quieter and quieter. No wonder she was treated as an unfortunate princess of a destroyed country. Her prophecy of calamity came true, and then her own country was destroyed. You didn't try to avoid the prophecy? Harlois shook her head. Of course, she wasn't saying that they didn't try to avoid the worst possible outcome. All our hard work actually made the prophecy come true even faster. Perhaps our hard work was a part of the prophecy. From that day on, I swore that I would never look at the stars again. She would rather not know anything about the future than face a future that was certain to be destroyed and hopeless. The silly cat seemed to be in a bad mood as she jumped off my shoulder, transformed into human form, and went upstairs. I suddenly felt rather scared. So, the #1 jinxer in the world had actually been hiding by my side all this time. Fortunately, she hadn't made a prophecy out of boredom. I suddenly chuckled to myself. At the very least, I wasn't the #1 jinxer in the world anymore. Is there anything special about a Loyo that I should pay attention to? Little Red's words brought me back to my senses. I regretfully shook my head as I looked at her, who seemed to be slightly drunk as she hugged her wine barrel. An immemorial god is actually that easy to deal with? Little Red had an expression of astonishment. She had only been casually asking. Honestly, why is Marguerite so fast? She only managed to maintain such a rare appearance for a few days. I was even intending to find an artist to commemorate this. The next instant, I came to a realization. It seemed that neither of us were talking about the same thing. Ah, easy to deal with? No, he's incredibly difficult to deal with. If my guess is correct, it's likely that he'll be even more difficult to deal with than conservation. Aloyo was a primordial god who had relied on his own power to ascend to godhood. Previously, he had even been a main god. Perhaps he had been living in seclusion for countless eons and wasn't very famous, but that didn't mean that his power level had decreased. A main god level sun god? A former over-god of an entire species? This probably wasn't much different from the god of holy light. Just thinking about it made my scalp numb. I still hoped that I could make a deal with Aloyo. If things didn't go well, I would at least have the ability to escape unscathed. This was one of the reasons why I had been practicing with conservation recently. Even if I can't defeat him, I'll at least be able to escape. And, Aloyo hasn't fought for so many years. He probably doesn't like fighting. No, he also has a war god divine concept. How could he possibly not like fighting? And, considering your usual luck, even if he doesn't like fighting, he'll definitely cause some sort of mishap in the end. So you're a jinxer as well. But, your words are so logical that I can't refute them at all. Chapter 614. Although Roland's battle against conservation didn't consume any energy or damage, this method of fighting against conservation was also a waste of time. More than a week passed by without Roland realizing it. As news of conservation's death spread, the mortal plane was probably in a huge uproar. I was rather curious as I strolled through the streets of the 137th level of the Chaos Abyss, the Blood Colosseum. This was my first time visiting this city, and I had heard that it was quite famous. For the past few days, he had been either staying in his room or preparing for the battle outside the city. Only now did he have the time to enjoy the scenery. Bloody Arena? What a strange city name. A human ran over and was chased by a flying axe. His head exploded. Ah, he was dead. A Hezru ran over, and a fallen angel chased after him. His head exploded. Ah, he died. A gnome ran over and a group of demons chased after him. Blood splattered everywhere and his head also exploded. TSK, brains splashed onto his body, how disgusting. I had already seen 7 or 8 tragic deaths on the way here. I felt like I now had an idea of the style of this Chaos Abyss city. It was probably that there were no rules. However, I felt that it was rather strange. If people were killed like this every day, there probably wouldn't be enough citizens no matter how many there were. Moreover, the pursuers actually ignored me. Considering my usual luck, this was very surprising. Young man, are you new here? Someone actually stopped me as I wandered about on the street. She was wearing a black cloak and seemed quite mysterious. However, the disgusting lumps on her arm, which was holding a witchcraft cane, exposed her identity. She was an Oni barber. Since someone took the initiative to explain to me, I nodded and admitted that it was my first time here. Hey, young man, this is not a safe area. Let's go over there and talk. Behind the old woman was a dark alley. She stepped aside and gestured for me to go inside. I then smiled. It was great to have a local guide who came to me on her own accord. I had been worrying about not knowing where to go to the dimensional door. At the very least, the Oni barbers were quite well informed. And so, I smiled as I reached out my hand and placed a silver-white ice sword on the Oni barber's neck. It wasn't that I really wanted to rob her. It was just that if I really followed the Oni barbers into an alleyway, it would be inconceivable that there wouldn't be a few ambushers jumping out to ambush me. As for whether they would be sold as human beings, organs, or souls, It all depended on what kind of business the Onibaba was engaged in. What are you going to do? Actually, I think it's good to talk here. Tell me everything you know. I will give you the reward you deserve according to the value of your information. You actually dare to offend our Raven's Eye, you idiot barbarian from the mortal plane, your doomsday. By the way, my name is Roland Mist. You should have heard of me. Pardieu. The Onibaba's wooden staff fell to the ground, and her entire body trembled as if she was suffering from a fever. It would seem that I was somewhat famous. Such a rare scene made me somewhat happy. The wanted criminal who robbed the Onibaba market. A golden egg worth 1,000 spirit coins? Sisters, we're rich. The Onibaba's cloak had already fallen to the ground, but she didn't even realize it. Her murky eyes were filled with pleasant surprise, and she pointed at me with a trembling finger as if she had just seen a rare treasure. Pu. The silly cat on my shoulder didn't give me any face as she laughed out loud. I paused in surprise as well. The next moment, I racked my brain, but couldn't remember anything about robbing an Onibaba market. Forget it, stop thinking about it. Do you really believe the Onibaba's words? They're just looking for an excuse to put you on the wanted list and find out where you are. The real people who put the bounty on your head. Donates, the Devil Lord, Sophocles the Deceiver, and so on. You've offended quite a few people, so just pick one. There was already a four-armed snake demon, a high-level vampire, and 2 Onibaba surrounding me. It would seem that this team was quite strong. Sigh, it would seem that I really should go to a small alley to talk. Hihi, you're so humorous. It's fine to go to a small alley right now as well. Oh, it would seem that they were still worried about alerting others because of my battle. There were rules in this city, and so, I really did go inside. 5 minutes later, the small alley's entrance was sealed off by ice. There were already corpses lying on the ground, which was filled with cold air. Meanwhile, the Onibaba in my hand was enthusiastically explaining the rules of this city to me. The Blood Colosseum of the Chaos Abyss was probably the most dangerous and bloody city in the entire world. Its ruler was a succubus. That's right, a succubus who had the weakest combat strength out of all demons and was a master at seduction and sex. Perhaps beauty was an irresistible weapon in the mortal world, but in the Chaos Abyss, beauty was nothing compared to muscles. Succubi didn't have a particularly high status in the Chaos Abyss, and this succubus was only able to control this city because she had a pet. Void Devourers were incredibly dangerous creatures. Void Devourers had the appearance of distorted space that was surrounded by a gigantic mouth the size of a mountain. An adult Void Devourer would be able to kill off a demon baron as easily as eating lunch. The main reason why Void Devourers weren't powerful was because they had low intelligence. You're saying that the City Lord was able to obtain the Void Devourer's trust because the Void Devourer was a free gift from her? Are you joking with me? Why don't you just say that it was a free gift from her phone bill? What do you mean by a phone bill? I don't have any, I wouldn't dare to lie to you. This has already spread throughout half the Chaos Abyss. It's said that Void Devourer's babies are incredibly cute, just like human-faced worms. That's why the City Lord is nicknamed Didina the Lucky. Human-faced worms? Just thinking about it was disgusting enough. She actually had such a creature as a pet. It would seem that the female Chaos Abyss truly had a problem with their sense of beauty. I could pretty much guess what had happened now that Didina mentioned it. The Void Devourer's diet was no different from that of a powerful demon. Souls that died in despair were definitely the most delicious of delicacies. But unlike ordinary demons, whose soul shards would return to the Gui Ming River after they died, the Void Devourer's souls would be unable to return to the cycle of reincarnation. This was also why both the Order Gods and the Chaos Evil Gods viewed Void Devourers as mortal enemies. Since the City Lord of this city had relied on the Void Devourer to rise to power, she naturally needed to feed this pet. In that case, she would probably need dozens or even hundreds of souls every day. Every day at noon, the mysterious Bloody Bell of Fate will activate. It will choose 12 random targets and mark them with a special color. These targets will become the prey of the entire city, and the hunter who kills them will receive a tremendous reward from the City Lord. I now understood why this city was called the Bloody Arena. Every day at noon, the bell would ring, and the entire city would transform into a gladiatorial arena. The unlucky ones would become the gladiators, while everyone else would either be the beasts in the arena or spectators enjoying the bloody slaughter. I didn't know the exact population of this city, but considering its size, there would definitely be several 100,000 people. If there were only a dozen or so targets every day, then most people would probably think I won't be so unlucky. When considering the various dangers of the Chaos Abyss, a death rate of 1 in 10,000 wasn't a big deal at all. Perhaps this city would even become a tourist attraction for this city. And if the marked target doesn't choose to hide or escape from the city, and instead openly lives in the city until noon the next day, they'll receive the City Lord's recognition. However, ever since the new City Lord took over, there have been no more than 5 such powerful individuals. In fact, it's quite common for those unlucky individuals to die in less than an hour. The Void Devourer isn't satisfied with the fear and despair in their souls. Clang clang. A bell suddenly rang in the sky, interrupting the Onibaba's words. She suddenly became excited. Yes, that's it. If it ends too quickly, the bell will ring again, and find another 12 unlucky individuals. Let me go, I need to find a place to hide. If I get picked, I'll have to leave the city as soon as possible. The panicked Onibaba suddenly stopped struggling and opened her swollen eyes wide as she glared at me. I paused in surprise as I looked up at the sky. The sky seemed to be rather red. Let me ask you something. Will the chosen prey have a red light shining on their heads? Yes, that's Dedina's blood spear. It's used to guide the hunters. Isn't my head really red? It's completely red. Why are you still so calm? You've become the entire city's enemy. I couldn't say anything to the Onibaba's question. If I had to explain, it could only be because, I'm used to it. I didn't even know what to say anymore. I didn't even have to sigh about how unlucky I was. When I heard the Onibaba's explanation, with my many years of experience, with my experience of being shot in the knee, I knew that it was highly likely that I would be picked. The hurried footsteps indicated that the hunters were approaching, and that the Onibaba was violently struggling. Let me go. I don't want to be dragged down by an unlucky individual. Don't pass your misfortune on to me. Fut. Even the Onibaba knows that you're an unlucky individual. The silly cat on my shoulder laughed without giving me any face, just like always. Shut up, misfortune bringing black cat. Damn, what's the meaning of turning into a white cat at a time like this? Are you mocking me? Chapter 6:15. As the master of the Chaos Abyss's bloody Colosseum, Lucky Dedina lived a life that all other succubi envied. Not only did she have power and status, she would never be able to give up the feeling of being at the top. Dedina didn't need to suck up to anyone in order to become a ruler. Many succubi viewed Dedina as their idol, and she also had a large number of succubi in her harem. In the past, someone seemed to have noticed that something seemed off. In any case, the succubi's targets had never been limited to men. Succubi's sexual orientation? This had always been a mystery. However, succubi were capable of evolving from other demon species, and demons were capable of changing their physical bodies and choosing their gender. Males were naturally suited for combat, which was why most demons were male. Succubi were only there to charm male rulers. More than 99% of succubi were naturally female. As for whether she had a male or female soul when she was an ordinary human, it was best not to think too deeply about some things. Yep, everything was Lucifer's fault. This also proved that if every individual in the world could choose their own gender, then, apart from the fact that there would definitely be problems with the ratio of males to females, there would probably be no morals or anything like that. Due to all these messy reasons, succubi had always been quite chaotic in their social circles. Everyone was used to it, and it was more important to have fun in the moment. Even in the entire universe, succubi were abnormal species among demons. Succubi were naturally quite passionate about power. They were naturally skilled at getting close to the strong, charming the strong, and enslaving the strong. Succubi were probably the species most skilled at scheming and power struggles. Having a succubus hidden in a mortal emperor's palace would be like a calamity descending upon the mortal world. Sooner or later, there would be major chaos. Why did this sound like the main characters of certain television dramas? Cough, cough, that was just a misconception. This wasn't something that could be easily criticized. Back in the day, Dedina's harem had over 300 succubi. Just imagine what a magnificent scene would be like if there were over 300 female protagonists in a harem drama together. Today, the West concubine mysteriously lost her child. How did she get pregnant in the first place? Tomorrow, some servant would inexplicably crash into the Phoenix Emperor. Every day, dozens of blockbusters would play out at the same time. Even the famous detective Keek wouldn't be able to see the truth. Even if he did, it would be meaningless. Cough, cough, it seems that I'm ridiculing something again for some reason. Getting back to the main topic, this sort of thing would probably be quite enjoyable to watch from afar, but having it happen right next to you every day would be as vexing as it could be. Even a true god wouldn't be able to take it, not to mention a succubus who was a rare existence among demons. The final result was that Dedina kicked out all the harem mistresses, and even said a famous quote from back in the day. "It's better to be single." This person would probably be very similar to Roland in this aspect. After that, she did something that no other succubus could understand or possibly do: stay single for 100 years. As a result, she became even more popular among the succubi. That look of abstinence is so cold and charming. Cough cough, don't misunderstand. Succubi are a race that excels at creating nymphomaniacs, but they won't become nymphomaniacs themselves. The true translation of this sentence should be, if it's so difficult, successfully conquering it will actually give me an even greater sense of accomplishment. And so, Dedina often went out to meet with beautiful women. Her carriage would always crash into a beautiful woman that appeared out of nowhere. If it was raining, there would always be a beautiful woman who didn't have an umbrella nearby. An old man who stopped her carriage to complain about his innocence would always have a beautiful daughter. Some people who had nothing better to do concluded that on average, Dedina would go out to meet with beautiful women every year. Most of the scenes would be different every time. However, new people would occasionally repeat the same scenes. Watching the city ruler meet with beautiful women became an important entertainment activity apart from the blood hunt. Unknowingly, the Blood City became the city with the highest number of succubi. Originally, Dedina could have treated this as a joke. Although she had fun, she hadn't been in the mood to go out and have fun for the past few days. Due to a certain unexpected reason, the city ruler's castle had been closed for 3 days now, refusing all visitors. Dedina's mood had always been terrible. Only during the noon hunt would she feel temporarily happy. "Come, let me see which ones will become our prey today." Dedina had short purple hair and a pair of fiery red horns. Her snake-like forked lips were gently licking her red lips. Even though she was wearing an extravagant formal dress, she had a mature woman's beautiful face and red desire. She was completely focused on the gigantic crystal ball before her. Under the bloody light of the blood bell, the unlucky individuals who had been enveloped by the bloody light were doing their best to escape. "Hurry up and catch that brat. Ha, her head is shattered." Right after that, Dedina's beautiful eyes were attracted by a lone hunter. He was currently cleanly killing a powerful purgatory giant. "I need that hunter. He reminds me of that two-headed gorilla demon from 50 years ago. That was so powerful. He was truly a monster. Perhaps I can properly reward him tomorrow in my own way." Dedina's face was flushed pink with excitement, making her look even more bewitching. "How long will he howl in pain before he dies when I slice off his flesh? I'm really looking forward to it." The hunters who came here to claim their bounty would always mysteriously disappear. Most people believed that the hunters had run off with the bounty from their domain lords. However, very few people knew that Dedina's personal dungeon still contained the skeletons of powerful individuals who had piqued her interest. Even though she was a succubus, she was still a member of the demon species. Demons naturally loved to kill. There were many ways to find food for the Void Devourer. Sending out a small team of demons would be quite easy. Dedina chose this method of hunting for fun rather than efficiency because she was satisfied with her own desires. Even though she had obtained the Void Devourer due to good luck, obtaining power didn't mean that everything would be easy. Many demons would choose to evolve into succubi in order to avoid competition. However, Didina voluntarily joined the bloody competition in the Chaos Abyss. Didina was an anomaly among succubi for being able to reach her current level. Actually, even if her individual power level couldn't compare to that of a true demon lord, she wasn't far off. Didina the Bloodthirsty was a nickname given to her by those who truly understood her existence. However, as a smart person, Didina preferred the Lucky Didina, as that would cause others to underestimate her existence. As for killing and whatnot, Didina could just leave it to her pets. However, it seemed that she was unlucky today. Her daily free time ended far too quickly. Not long after she finished watching, the unlucky succubi were all killed by the hunters, and the game ended here. However, Didina still wasn't satisfied yet, and so, when she rang that blood-red bell again, she unknowingly rang her own death knell. Hey! What's that? A holy knight. That's wonderful. I'm so lucky. This is a super rare item. As expected of the lucky Didina. However, the strange thing was that the golden-haired holy knight with the holy light on his hand was currently looking up at the sky, as if he could see Didina. See him? Impossible. However, what happened next caused Didina to be unable to believe it. That golden-haired holy knight suddenly released his holy light, and a gigantic pillar of light shot into the clouds. Right after that, several powerful individuals continuously released their auras in Didina's city. Not a single one of them was weaker than Didina. 5. How is this possible? Why didn't I receive any information about such powerful individuals? When all the powerful individuals started moving, it was quite obvious where they were going. The target of the grenades was Didina, who was in the center of Didina's city. Damn it, if only Victor was still here. Victor was the name that Didina had given to the Void Devourer. The main reason why Didina was in such a bad mood that she locked herself in her room was because Victor had suddenly been abducted 3 days ago. Perhaps it would be more appropriate to call it elopement. After all, the person who had abducted the Void Devourer was that legendary man. Damned Beifeng Herald, it's one thing for you to harm others in the mortal plane. Why did you come to the Chaos Abyss? One day, I'm going to peel off your flesh piece by piece. Didina hurriedly prepared to escape as she viciously cursed the bastard Draken who had kidnapped her pet. She wasn't a berserker demon who only knew how to hold on. As expected, this was a well-prepared ambush. This is all a scheme. Multiple powerful individuals had silently and successfully infiltrated the mortal plane, a strange individual had successfully kidnapped her pet, and a sudden ambush while her pet was gone. Didina felt like she had seen through everything when all these clues were right in front of her. Once I find out just who planned this scheme, and how they were even able to invite that moving calamity Beifeng. No matter who it is, I, Didina the Bloodthirsty, will definitely return the favor 3 times over. Didina unhesitatingly opened up a secret tunnel and prepared to leave Didina's city. As long as she could find her pet, she would be able to reclaim her position as the city's ruler. But if she died, everything would be over. Crack. However, the sudden shattering of the wall and the visitor behind it indicated that she was too late. A golden-winged holy knight was blocking in front of her, a red-haired swordsman was by her side, and a little red dragon with powerful magical wavelengths was aiming at her. After a dimensional crack opened up, an archmage had appeared. This situation made Didina realize that she had nowhere to run. Damned bastards, you actually allowed that guy to kidnap my precious pet. You actually used Beifeng first. Do you have any conscience or bottom line left? Didina was only instinctively venting her dissatisfaction. However, she discovered that the golden-haired holy knight's expression instantly distorted when he heard Beifeng's name. He suddenly took a step back as if he wanted to run away. But then, he seemed to feel that this reaction was rather embarrassing, so he kept a serious expression and spoke. No, I don't know him. I've never known who Beifeng is, nor would I ever use Beifeng first. We're just asking for directions. We're leaving immediately. Right, little succubus, do you know how to get to the sun god's divine kingdom? Even succubi who weren't the most skilled at lying knew that this holy knight was spouting nonsense. Everyone knew the name of Beifeng. Yet, he was asking a chaos demon lord for directions to the god of holy light's divine kingdom. Wasn't this the same as saying I'll send you to heaven or evil, let me purify you? No, don't kill me, at least not today. I've been single for 100 years. I don't want to die as a single succubus. At the very least, let me find a partner before I die. Even though this was just a random excuse, Didina saw that the golden-haired holy knight mysteriously seemed to be moved to tears. However, Didina's reply was incomprehensible. Don't even think about it. As a veteran fire mage, I'm going to burn every single heterosexual to death. You've been single for 100 years, and you still want to leave me? Dream on. Even though he was clearly a holy knight, he mysteriously started burning. The powerful individuals around him also didn't know whether to laugh or cry. No, I'm not heterosexual. No, no. It was obvious that Didina hadn't thought about what she just said. She actually broke out into a cold sweat when she thought about it. For the inflexible holy light job class members, being wrong about something like this would be a tremendous blasphemy. It would be a true death sentence. However, what was even more inconceivable was that the next instant, the holy knight smiled and nodded at Didina, as if the ferocious flames from earlier were nothing more than an illusion. Not heterosexual? Then there's no problem. You're allowed to leave the team. Chapter 616. Originally, I didn't intend to make trouble for the domain lord of this city. After all, it would indeed be a bad reputation for me to get into trouble wherever I went. But due to certain reasons, I ended up making trouble for her in the end. Fine then, she was the one who made trouble for me, even though she didn't do it on purpose. Since I had been marked with that mysterious symbol, rather than wasting time with those small fries, it was naturally the best choice to directly attack the root of the problem. I had originally intended to have a good fight against the Void Devourer, but then I heard some new information. I was rather glad that I had been either in seclusion or in the wilderness outside the city for the past few days. Otherwise, if I really did meet that Void Devourer, it would have been quite difficult to deal with it. Especially since Casio was right next to me. No matter if I had a joyous reunion on Mount Brokeback, or if I had a chance to kill him, that would have been a wonderful scene. When I learned that the Void Devourer was more than 400 meters tall and had the appearance of a large, ball-shaped mouth, I was even more impressed with his methods. I felt that his tastes were becoming more and more extreme. Perhaps others could say that she was the lucky Didina for being able to raise this Void Devourer from a small larva into such a gigantic monster. However, I was becoming more and more interested in this incredibly humble succubus. TSK, your real girlfriend is right next to you, and you're saying that you're interested in other women? You're just as super scumbag as that subordinate of yours. You know that's not what I'm interested in. Also, don't compare me to that guy. I'm afraid that I'll get killed if I go out. The silly cat and Marguerite had already gone through all the treasure troves of this city lord's castle. Adam and I were in charge of watching over this succubus. However, seeing how obedient she was, I was even beginning to suspect that there was no need for us to watch over her. Still, there were some things that I had to ask. That was the part that piqued my interest. Didina, how old are you this year? Little Red, who was eavesdropping on me, had an expression of astonishment. The silly cat's retort came just as expected. You get 0 points for this pickup line. Shut up. You know that's not what I meant. Normally speaking, the stronger a creature was, the slower it would be for them to grow up. Dwarfs and elves would need at least 100 years to reach adulthood. I didn't know how many years it would take for a Void Devourer to reach adulthood, but based on the rumors and the rarity of Void Devourers, it was likely that this succubus was even older than Harlois. It would have been understandable if it had been any other demon. However, succubi were a species that lacked combat strength to begin with. Many demons only evolved into succubi for temporary use. It was quite rare to see a succubus with such a long lifespan. Perhaps in other places, age did not mean strength. However, in the Chaos Abyss, living for so long was proof of one's strength. A combination of an ancient and a succubus. You've really piqued my interest. Perhaps you can tell me how you managed to survive in the abyss before your Void Devourer matured. You really like to joke. As a succubus, is there a third way to survive other than relying on the strong? This ancient succubus was at a perfect distance from me. She smiled in a friendly manner without trying to flatter me. I had a good impression of her at first glance. If it wasn't for her natural personality, it was likely that she had seen through my likes and dislikes. If this was also a type of charm ability, it was likely that she had already reached the legend rank. I chuckled and didn't pursue the matter. There was no need to take such an old woman's words seriously. I didn't believe that she would be able to solve the problem with just a few sentences. In that case, perhaps we can discuss some business. You can probably tell that we're not locals of the Chaos Abyss. I already had such a thought for a long time. If I were to travel to another place, it would save me a lot of trouble if I had a local. At the very least, I wouldn't be randomly tricked or walk into a dead end, especially when this world was so dangerous that there were death traps everywhere. Every time I found a teleportation portal, I would have to fight a boss. This was no different from a bandit trying to rob someone. We needed a local of the Chaos Abyss to be our guide. The smarter and more experienced one was, the better. Old people would always know many secrets. Perhaps this information would have been known by everyone several thousand years ago, such as a certain domain lord's personality or special abilities. But in the current era, this would be top-secret information that no amount of money could buy. Who knew when this information would be of great use? As for how to make her obediently listen to me, there were many other methods. She was a succubus who was used to relying on the strong. She would be much easier to get along with than other demon species. Then, have you heard of Arroyo? Please be careful with your answer. Perhaps a lie will be useful to me. But if I underestimate your value because of this, do you know who'll be the unlucky one? I was just spouting nonsense. However, in the world of demons, individuals with no value would have no reason to live. In her ears, this was probably a direct threat of death. Didina still didn't understand my personality, so she probably wouldn't be so foolish as to spout nonsense at a time like this. Didina paused in surprise for a moment, and then thought about it. She closed her eyes as if searching for this name in her memory. Wait a moment. The moment that my right hand touched the hilt of my sword, she instantly remembered. It's best not to directly address such existences by their names. If you must address them by their names, please refer to Her Highness as Eagle of Light. I chuckled. It would seem that Didina was truly an ancient artifact. Perhaps she was even as old as Harlois. If you keep saying the word old, or comparing me to her, Harlois was quite sensitive about this. However, she couldn't think of anything that could threaten me. I was already undefeatable in the world. I'll send a clone to bring Beifeng back. I was wrong. Please don't. TSK, this was such a headache. Weren't you afraid that your clone wouldn't be able to return? I'm not afraid. I'll just find a place to transform into my human form. Now, my clone can transform into a human form as well. It would seem that Harlois' transformation and cloning abilities had been strengthened even further after reaching the myth rank. Isn't this like a ninja technique, shadow clone technique? Cloning technique? Of course it's possible. Right now, I only need one afternoon to finish reading an entire library's worth of books by myself. I can even do large-scale experiments by myself without an assistant. Aren't you jealous? TSK, that's not what I'm jealous of. What you're jealous of isn't the ability to cosplay shadow clone technique, but the ability to cosplay harem. Cough, cough, what nonsense are you saying? What would a gentleman like me be thinking? System, you're actually thinking in such a way? You're so dirty. TSK, keep pretending. I'm not talking about that. What were you so excited about just now? I pretended not to hear anything and focused my attention elsewhere. When I urgently contacted Adam and the others to attack the City Lord's castle, the young adventurers also came over. Youngsters of the Silver Sworn Avengers, what do you intend to do next? This strange adventuring team name was the name of Kagio's adventuring team. As for why they named themselves this adventuring team and what they wanted to avenge, since the person who named them had already died, it was probably impossible to know. Next, we were about to venture deeper into the Chaos Abyss. Nobody would know what sort of enemies we would meet. At that time, we might not even have the ability to take care of them. Although we could directly toss them into a bug-like world to save them if we were forced into a corner, the difference in power between us and our enemies would make it impossible for us to save them. Can I follow you? I desire to be able to follow you in search of the true path of salvation. Avla was the first to express her opinion. However, this was to be expected. The awakening of the Daybreak Holy Sword had shocked and injured her, but it had also caused a subtle change in the very source of her power. As a former holy knight and fallen angel who had lost her faith, chasing after the light had probably become an instinct for her. I didn't express my opinion. Instead, I looked at the others. I'm going to report to my master. However, my master has instructed that if you have any need, I shall be at your service. The bearded dwarf priest had an expression of a martyr's honor, as if he was already mentally prepared to enter hell. I'm going back. The elf mage Yurtler had a resolute expression. I'm going to be together with my tribe, even if we're about to face destruction. Yurtler lowered his hood. His expression of resolution made him seem even more like a martyr than the dwarf priest. Yep, you can go ask that succubus over there. There's a teleportation portal nearby that connects to the mortal plane. Our team does indeed need a holy job class member, but you're far from enough. Tell Bayana that if she or anyone else has a suitable person, send one to us. I casually said this. Right now, it seemed like I was the only healer in our team. This was indeed quite displeasing, but if I hoped that this dwarf priest would participate in our battle, that would be the same as throwing his life away. Kageo, I'll follow you. It was a simple answer that expressed my attitude. I nodded. Since he was an old acquaintance, there was no need for me to ask too much. It seemed that he didn't want to return to the surface yet. I seemed to have forgotten that I hadn't told him that Beifong had come to the Chaos Abyss. Forget it, we probably wouldn't meet. Our current team was made up of powerful combat job classes. We indeed lacked hunters, druil, thieves, and other survival job classes that were highly skilled in wilderness survival and information gathering. With Kageo following us, our wilderness tracking and anti-tracking abilities wouldn't seem so amateurish. Alright, let's do this then. Kageo, Avla, I'll say this first. If we meet an overly powerful opponent, I want you to go to that world to take refuge. You must listen to me obediently. There's no room for negotiation. The two of them silently nodded, indicating that they would obey. Now then, what's next is the most important matter. I intentionally increased my voice to attract everyone's attention. I, Roland Mist, shall give our new adventuring team a resounding name. Please don't. I don't want to be laughed at anymore. Has your name ever been normal? Adam instantly covered his mouth, and Little Red pressed down on my head as if she was afraid that I would say something. What did she mean by having a normal name? The mercenary group I named myself was currently one of the top mercenary groups in the entire world. Their honest, trustworthy, and secretive mercenary spirit had already spread throughout the entire mercenary world. Are you certain that this gentlemanly spirit has anything to do with the word gentleman that I named myself? How could it have nothing to do with me? At the very least, it's the exact same word. TMPH, you guys didn't want me to name myself, but I wanted to. I even had to secretly register myself and advertise on the fairies' daily newspaper. Yep, what should I name myself? Right, the roasted abyss octopus feet that I ate yesterday were really delicious. How about I call myself Abyss Roasted Fishball? Tentacle Alliance. The Eight-Legged Tribe. The Mollusk Happy Squadron? Just as I was thinking of something, Harlois suddenly sent me a message that interrupted my thoughts. Roland, come over here for a moment. There's something here that I really care about. Chapter 617. While Roland and his companions began their new journey in the Chaos Abyss, the mortal plane was in a complete uproar. The Elven Empire is officially established. Have the elves gone insane? While many human kingdoms were waiting to see the elves make a fool of themselves, a piece of news shocked them greatly. The elves announced that they were establishing a new kingdom of the elves. Not only that, it was going to be the Elven Empire from the elves' memories. The Elven Empire of Saint Heon, the Moon Elf Queen Athena has been promoted to Elven Empress Athena I. The coronation ceremony will be held in 1 week. The entire Elven god faction will be worshipped by the former Silver Elf war god Sonya. The capital will be the Moonwheel capital. 27 elven royal families will swear allegiance to the Moon Elves, including the Moon Elves, Silver Elves, Wood Elves, and Night Elves. That's right, all 4 major High Elves have been established. Previously, Athena had also announced that she was establishing an elven empire. However, there were far too many elven royalty and tribes that refused to submit to the Moon Elves' rule. This directly caused internal strife among the elves. It could be said that her title of Empress was meaningless. This time, the official announcement even included the emblems of the 4 major High Elves, as well as several hundred different elven families. If the High Elves submitted to the new elven empire, ordinary elves would naturally be unable to oppose it. It was as if the elven empire that had been destroyed for tens of thousands of years had suddenly crawled out of its grave. But soon, the problem with the announcement was revealed to everyone. Not mentioning anything else, the original Night Elves had already transformed into Dark Elves. And after Rose's downfall, most Dark Elves should have formed inextricable connections with the Mega Mist Alliance in the Northlands. Why would they appear in this announcement? The emblems of the Night Elves in the announcement were all real. However, heraldry experts and historians discovered that these emblems belonged to families that had already been destroyed in history. Some had been destroyed due to elven internal strife, while others had been completely destroyed because they refused to follow Rose. Perhaps some of these families still existed, but it would be impossible for them to form a family. According to the news, there were indeed dark-skinned elves going in and out of the Moonwheel capital. It seemed that the Moon Elves had long since prepared for this. No matter if these Night Elf nobles were Dark Elves from the underground, or the descendants of the Night Elves who refused to follow Rose back in the day, from a legal standpoint, this barely made sense. A single person could count as a family. The Moon Elves and Silver Elves were all real. As for the Wood Elves, when considering the fact that the Wood Elves were scattered all over the mountains and forests, it was completely understandable that the Wood Elves would be willing to support the Moon Elves. In that case, from a legal standpoint, the Elven Empire seemed to meet the requirements. Everyone had the same opinion of them. This is to satisfy your craving before you die. Some people said that the elves were gathering all of their power to form a defensive line at the Moonwheel capital in order to fight to the death. However, anyone who studied the records of previous demon waves would know that this was all nonsense. Even the entire elven species combined might not be able to match up to a single human mega empire. How could the elves possibly stop a demon wave that was capable of destroying a mega empire? Even if the elven empire was revived, and all elves were responsible for protecting their own empire, not to mention how much the current generation of elves still identified with the elven empire, it was quite obvious that it wouldn't be a good idea to drag elves into a fire pit. The Moon Elves seemed to have completed their dream and truly became the elven royalty, unifying all the elves. However, some elves couldn't bear to watch this any longer. How laughable. Instead of thinking about how to survive in the face of such a calamity, you're doing such unrealistic things. Just this alone makes it impossible for us to admit that the Moon Elves are superior to us. The ones with the most intense reactions weren't the underground Dark Elves, nor were they the Grey Elves that had merged with the Mist Alliance. Instead, it was the Silver Elves that nobody expected. The Silver Elves who had the most intense reactions refused to acknowledge the existence of the Elven Empress and the Elven Empire. In fact, they even announced that they were still at war with the Moon Elf Kingdom. The Wild Elf villages and communities that had the most intense reactions were the Wild Elves villages and communities. Their bloodlines were impure. The superior elves didn't care about them to begin with, nor did they care about the superior elves and purebred elves' inheritance from the Elven Empire. The Wild Elves had long since taken root in various lands, and they were quite disgusted with the Elven Empire and Elven Empress who had mysteriously become their nominal masters. Surprisingly, for the first few days, the Northland's Mist Alliance, which was supposed to speak up, remained silent. Actually, the Northland's Mist Alliance was the one with the most authority to speak up. The Northlands already had Greyblood Elves, formerly Moon Elves, Pure Moon Elves, 3 Northlands elf kingdoms had already joined the Mist Alliance, Wood Elves, Kelly's tribe had already moved to the Northlands for several years, and the great majority of Dark Elves. Imperceptibly, the Northland's Mist Alliance now had more than half superior elves. The most inconceivable part was that, unlike the Moonwheel Elven Empire, which had endless internal strife, these superior elves were actually able to coexist peacefully. There were even examples of intermarriage and half-blood elves. Unlike the elven tradition of treating half-blood elves as bastards and demoting them to wild elves, the Northlands elves didn't view half-blood elves and half-elves with enmity. In fact, the Northlands government intentionally encouraged the birth of even more half-blood elves. This unconventional behavior of the Northlands elves helped the ordinary inferior elves and wild elves gain a good impression of the Northlands elves. Above the high-level elves were the Mist Kingdom's legendary wood elf teacher Kelly, the first Desecration Priestess Victoria, the Moon General Diana, the Dove of Peace Queen Swana, the Grey Elves Despair Guards, Sulphur Mountain City's Town Security, Anti-Holy Knight, and Desecration Priests. These Northlands elves were now famous throughout the entire world. Sometimes, a great reputation would be even more important than actual combat strength, especially when it came to the so-called orthodoxy. Perhaps with the Mist Alliance's overall support, the newest magical engineering technology, the support of half-blood elves and half-elves, Law Knight, Anti-Holy Knight, Desecration Priests, 4 elemental swordcasters, and other powerful combat job classes that kept up with the times, the Northlands elves' power was no weaker than the full Moon Elven Empire. Perhaps the only part where the Northlands elves couldn't compare to the full Moon elves was that they didn't have the support of the elven gods. But when considering that the Northlands elves were supported by the Hades gods, the Northlands elves would still have a stronger backer. All they need is a title, but before the Northlands elves even said anything, this title came by itself. Some of the younger Silver Elf families understood the current political situation and unhesitatingly chose to head north. Not only did the human kingdoms along the way not stop them, they even sent out night squadrons and armies to escort them, as if they were afraid that the full Moon Elves would try to stop them. And so, the ball was now in the Northlands Mist Alliance. More accurately speaking, it was in the hands of the Northlands Elves higher-ups, as well as Ranae, Shueti, and so on. Silver Elves, Greyblood Elves, Moon Elves, Wood Elves, and Dark Elves. Fine then. This meant that the 4 superior elves were all here. There were also large numbers of half-blood elves, wild elves, and half-elves supporting them. Since the full moon capital was able to call itself an elven royal family, the Northlands elves could also call themselves an elven royal family. The 4 superior elves who supported the Northlands elves had even more complete inheritances, and there were even more elven nobility. The news that a second elven empire was about to become a new member of the Mist Alliance spread throughout the entire Northlands. Some people were already saying that the Mist Alliance's oldest wood elf, Kelly, would wear the crown and become the new elven empress. The dark elf Victoria would become the head priestess and head priest, the grey elf Diana would become the grand marshal of the military, and the grey-blood elf Swana, currently a banshee, would become the prime minister. Considering that most of the rumors were spread by the Dark Elves and Greyblood Elves, the truth and credibility of these rumors were quite high. Also, from another perspective, this reflected the Northlands Elves' desire. They also desired a complete elven empire. Yet, at this critical moment, the Northlands government remained abnormally silent. The Northlands leaders didn't know anything at all. They acted like they were natural idiots who had just started playing politics. The Northlands government's stupidity made all the countries and leaders anxious. Every day, envoys and ambassadors from various countries started blocking the Mist Alliance government's door. Actually, that was because the Northlands government wasn't in a hurry. Renee and the others couldn't sleep at night anymore. They kept having meetings to discuss the situation, but were still unable to come up with a final plan. And they were still unable to contact the person who could truly make a decision that everyone else would believe in. Even worse, that person had the noblest elven bloodline in the entire world by her side. In terms of the Elven Empire's name, no one else was more deserving of the title than her. Previously, she had been dead, so she didn't seem to count as a member of the elves anymore. But now, she was indeed a living elf who should be responsible for the fate of her people. Gold Elf Princess Harlois, the final ruler of the Elven Empire, and the ruler of all elves in name. All intelligence agencies and organizations are to take action and spread rumors as a cover. The truth that she's alive absolutely cannot be leaked, at least not until Roland makes a decision. Chapter 618. Holy Light, Ice, Death, and Law. Any one of these four major domains would require a wise individual's entire lifetime's worth of effort. Everyone's natural talents were biased. So-called all-round geniuses would mostly be average in all aspects. The more profound the knowledge, the more time would be needed to accumulate and explore. Perhaps long-lived species could use their long lifespans to overcome this problem, but short-lived species didn't have such a luxury. For Roland, his ability growth was quite unique. He had reached the peak in all four of his abilities. Although it seemed like he was breaking this basic rule, he actually didn't have to pay much attention to them at all. For Roland, rather than viewing these domains as a type of power and knowledge, it would be better to view them as philosophies of life. His belief in holy light had been initiated by Estrada. Roland practiced the path of protection passed down through generations of holy night. Coupled with holy light's favor, Roland was able to reach the peak step by step. But judging from how he upgraded the path of holy light to the path of salvation, it was as if he was using theology and philosophy to research holy light. He wasn't like other holy light job class members who only researched holy light and its usage. Roland hadn't researched any divine arts specifically for high-level priests or holy knight. This was the most obvious proof. In terms of holy light usage, techniques, and high-level divine arts, not to mention other semigod knight and priests, Roland might not even be able to compare to a legend-ranked holy knight who had bitterly trained in holy light. There was no need to even mention law. This was the result of Roland's 2 lifetimes accumulation and pursuit. It was more about his understanding of life and the rules. Roland was a pioneer, but he wasn't a dedicated researcher. He hoped that law would be able to change the world, but he had no interest in researching the usage of the power of law. The great majority of new law incantations in the world were pioneered by other law job class members. Roland himself didn't even know any. Since he was becoming less and less interested in using the power of law, he was using the power of law less and less often in battle. The power of ice was also in the same situation. Out of all the powers, ice was probably the one with the worst control. If it wasn't for the fact that he had to gather all 4 elements and had the system cheat all the way, he probably wouldn't have been able to reach this stage. Just his understanding of ice magic was what he had learned over the years. Compared to ordinary ice mags, he was probably quite good. However, compared to true mags, he could only be considered an apprentice. The amount of ice magic that he knew right now couldn't even compare to a legend-ranked ice mage who had been trained in ice magic. A truly strong person would reach the peak step by step. Spellcasters would definitely have a huge accumulation of spells. They would obtain the principles and knowledge of low-level spells by analyzing the models of low-level spells. They would then master mid-level and high-level spells step by step. Only when they reached the peak and reached the bottleneck would they begin researching their own specialized spells. Someone like Roland, who grasped the essence and principles but was unable to apply them, would not be able to turn his power into actual combat ability. Being a mage that was skilled in thousands of different spells wasn't just a gimmick. Roland, who only knew ice arrows, blizzard, and ice eon, was the least qualified ice mage in the world. That was why he would always forget to use his spells as he fought. In the end, he would return to melee combat, which he was the most skilled at. When people were panicking, they would naturally rely on and trust the things they were most familiar with. This meant that Roland had probably invested far more into his swordsmanship than his ice magic. At the very least, he trusted his own swords more than his ice magic. The only ice-type forbidden spell that he could use, apart from the system's assistance, Ice Eon, was even more of the knowledge he had accumulated over 2 lives, as well as his understanding of death and destruction. Ice Eon was the crystallization of his Lich body and his 3 lives of reincarnation. That's right. The spell that Roland had truly invested a tremendous amount of time and energy into, as well as the fact that he was naturally talented in this area, was death. That period of time was when Roland had discovered the truth about his former country. He had fallen into a desperate situation and had gone insane. It was also when he desired power the most in his entire life. The weakness of smart people was that they loved to slack off, and that they would always overthink things and miss opportunities. During that period of time, Roland greatly desired the power to take revenge. He was willing to go all out and directly uncover the secrets of the soul. The only undead emperor in the past 1,000 years, the pinnacle of soul studies, and the creator of the undead structure. These titles from the undead and mags were perhaps the best evidence of Roland's level in the field of death. At the very least, when it came to researching the essence of the soul, Roland was already at the peak of the multiverse. In fact, the reason why he was able to control other types of power was because of his understanding of his own soul. He was now able to transform his beliefs and emotions into actual power. His experience of bathing in the river Styx, as well as his memories of entering death and the cycle of reincarnation multiple times, allowed his understanding of the essence of death to surpass that of any other existence in the world. In fact, it even surpassed Aishi, the creator of death. Roland's true research results had yet to appear in front of the world. And, what was truly enough for Roland to leave a mark in Aishi's history wasn't his frightening creations like the 7 original sins. After all, the previous undead emperors had even more frightening undead creations. The 7 original sins themselves were nothing more than a byproduct of Roland's research on the soul and his pursuit of power. He broke through the boundaries between life and death. That's right, this was Roland's greatest achievement. Before Roland, death was death. No matter if one entered the river Styx or the cycle of reincarnation, everything would be over. Nobody would ever be able to truly be revived. The moment that Lisa fell into the river Styx, she had already died. Even if Roland pulled her out of the river Styx and gave her a new life, she would be a completely different person. You could even say that she had been Lisa in her previous life. You could become an undead, a god's envoy, or an angel. However, all of these were different methods of extending your life. The living would still be the living, and the dead would still be the dead. Nobody would be able to break through this boundary. No matter if it was the undead emperors, the nature gods, or even the creator goddesses and main gods, none of them were able to break through the boundaries between life and death. Only Roland was able to do research that nobody else dared to even think about, and he even succeeded. Perhaps this was because, at his core, he was still the same crazy Lich that had no limits. However, such an achievement wasn't something that would allow him to reach the heavens in a single bound. Nor was it possible for him to reach the heavens in a single bound. Roland's research path had an obvious path. Even when researching undead creations, the 7 original sins used their own bodies as research materials. They dissected the soul's intrinsic nature, desires, emotions, and other soul characteristics. As the 7 original sins were all gathered, Roland's understanding of the soul's intrinsic nature surpassed all other existences. After all, nobody else would be insane enough to dissect a part of their own soul and toss it into other undead creations to cultivate, and then observe the changes in the soul's intrinsic nature. If it wasn't for the fact that Roland was known as the Undying, this would be no different from suicide. His experience in the river Styx allowed him to personally come into contact with the living and the undead for the first time in his entire life. No one else would be able to enter the river Styx or the cycle of reincarnation. Roland used his previous understanding of the soul's intrinsic nature to unravel the foundational difference between the living and the undead. I now had a crack in the mysteries of life and death. However, there were some things that would be impossible to accomplish even if I knew the principles behind them. I didn't intend to break through the limits of life and death. According to my calculations, that would require a tremendous amount of energy and tremendous losses. Actually, this research result was nothing more than a byproduct of his research on creation and creation. It was an exploration of the intrinsic nature of life. He had no intentions of reviving anyone. In the Northlands, during the incident that caused angels to fall, Roland successfully created life. However, he didn't create a soul. He only proved that the extremity of the power of light was darkness, and that the chaos of death and the order of holy light could actually be combined to create life. This was enough for him to become the god of holy light's mortal enemy. The final result of his research on creation and creation was in the mortal plane of Hades. Let's not talk about that for now. But since it was possible to create physical bodies, then wouldn't it be possible to create a complete individual life with the addition of a soul? Unlike those alchemy puppets and living creations, this would be a true living being. The creator goddess's authority. No, the creator goddess's ability to create things was limited. After they created things, they could only allow their species to spread and evolve. This was creating an individual from scratch. Perhaps this was a glory that far surpassed the creator goddesses. Even Roland was tempted by such a great opportunity. And so, when Ale cut off the connection between the earth elemental plane and the mortal plane, when all high-level existences couldn't even look at him, Roland grit his teeth and performed a final experiment. Roland used Harlois as his experimental subject. He burned the soul of the divine Sin Shadow and poured the essence of his soul into Harlois in an attempt to make up for Shadow's flaws as an undead and transform her from an undead into an undead. The result. Everyone should know the result now. Harlois came back to life. Although she still had some undead characteristics, she indeed came back to life. Her soul and physical body fused together. From now on, she no longer needed hatred to control her soul. She could reproduce and become infinitely stronger, but this was meaningless. Roland had never hoped that the silly cat would become capable of fighting. Did Roland succeed? That might not be the case. Although he succeeded this time, which meant that Roland's research and revival rituals were correct, he had used an incredibly rare and powerful divine Sin's soul to revive Harlois. A life in exchange for a life would require a tremendous amount of energy. This sort of revival technique had no practical meaning at all. Of course, many theoretical research results wouldn't have any practical meaning at first. They could only be placed in a laboratory for show. But as other technologies were developed and industry improved, these results would become more and more practical. In the past 2 years, due to some other objective factors, technology from the Halletdam generation, Roland had developed 2 applications for this technology. As long as he used them, they would be more than enough for him to win the Medal of Truth and obtain the title of the most outstanding undead mage in the past 10,000 years. But when considering the social impact that announcing these technologies would have, or perhaps it would be more appropriate to describe it as a world revolution, Roland obediently locked this technology away in his treasury. As a magical pet, Harlois' soul connection allowed her to observe things in great detail. This was the main reason why Roland had chosen Harlois as his experimental subject. At the very least, back in the day, Roland would never have imagined what it would mean for the silly cat to be the only gold elf alive in the world. The dead have no human rights, but the living are different. The gold elves, the royalty of the elves, had already been extinct for countless years. Even if Harlois still existed in the world as an undead, she had already lost her status as an elf. How could any elf possibly recognize her? But if she was alive, wouldn't that mean that she would regain her status as the Elven Empress? At the very least, the elves' laws didn't mention this. But as long as the rightful successor of the Elven throne was still alive, the elves who wanted to rebel against the Gold Elf Empress would feel uncomfortable, and the elves would have other choices. Since the elves were in trouble, and the current elven gods were unable to guide the elves to a better life, the elves would naturally think of their past leader. This was something that someone, or perhaps it should be said that a god saw through. The god of wisdom, Calamanders, as a half-elf who had lived in the Gold Elf generation, old Calamanders was quite nostalgic. For a long period of time, he had protected Harlois, at the very least preventing her from mysteriously dying because of the elven gods. During the Battle of the Hades, Calamander's true body descended. Although he didn't actually do anything, and instead, he was actually flirting with the Hades, it was impossible for a main god who paid close attention to Harlois to not notice that she had changed. After this, Roland and Calamanders had a secret discussion. Roland knew that he had unknowingly caused a major problem. You absolutely can't tell anyone. Otherwise, the elven gods will do everything in their power to kill her. She's currently connected to your soul. If you don't die, she won't die. In that case, the elven gods will definitely do everything in their power to kill you. And if you don't want to be hunted down by countless gods, don't tell anyone that you have the ability to revive. Roland didn't care about Calamander's warning at all. He knew that even if Harlois didn't come out to cause trouble, just the fact that she was the rightful successor to the Elven Empire and her bloodline status would be enough for the elven gods to hunt her down. In fact, Roland didn't even remind Harlois about this. Or, Perhaps Harlois had tacitly forgotten about the possible consequences of her revival. Death would be the end of everything. However, the living would have to bear responsibility, and this would be quite a heavy burden. Dealing with traitors, elven internal conflicts, reuniting the elven species and the elven gods, and leading the entire elven species. Just thinking about it made one's scalp go numb. Roland was afraid of trouble, so he chose to let all of this be forgotten in history. Even if Harlois intends to re-establish the Elven Empire, that'll be the equivalent of opposing the Moon Elves. Right now, the elves are still living quite well. Since they can eat their fill, who would be so bored as to rebel against her and restore the Elven Empire? Since it's impossible to do, then I won't say anything. However, some things couldn't be avoided just because one wanted to. Thanks to the ironic fate's hands, Roland had created a major problem for himself. Some problems, some responsibilities would have to be faced sooner or later. Perhaps Roland's team had lost contact with the mortal plane in the Chaos Abyss. But soon, through the fairies' communication network, the inevitable decision had to be made. The Elven Empire created by the 4 superior elves and the ancient Elven Empire created by the Gold Elves and the 4 superior elves. The former is still in the midst of an Armageddon crisis, while the latter has the Elven Empire's inheritance and a safe backer. Is there even a need to say which one will be more likely to become the rightful royalty in the eyes of the elves? Chapter 619. The most favored and favored child of the mother goddess, the elves. If the creator goddess herself favored the elves, then the elves would doubtlessly be the most favored child. Beautiful appearances, long lifespans, powerful and favored natural talents, the possibility of dual cultivation in magic and martial arts, and the extraordinary potential of the superior elves and royal elves. All of this was the favor of the creator goddess. And this favor also created a unique elven culture. The elves' natural talents in combat and long lifespans allowed them to reach the peak of the multiverse in terms of magic and martial arts. The elves also created a society with a strict hierarchy and a strict division of labor. Their natural beauty coupled with their sensitivity and relentless pursuit of beautiful things caused their art, music, literature to reach the point of extravagance and waste. This also allowed them to have a long history of their racial culture, which allowed them to survive the long ice age without falling apart. The elves were the most favored child of the creator goddess. This was a truth that no living creature could deny. No civilization had as long a history as the elves. The oldest gold elves were the gold citizens born alongside the first immemorial dragons and demons. It could be said that they were born at the very beginning of creation. In the elves' history, they had fought against the great demons and exchanged technology with the Halitdam generation. They had even taught ancient and modern humans what magic was. The elves' glory was far, far too long. Don't discuss history and art in front of the elves, just like don't brag about your courage in front of the beast men. This ancient saying explained many things. The Holy War was cruel. Other ruling species lost their status as main characters and would often disappear in history, such as the Great Demon Empire, the Halitdam generation, the Dwarven Empire, and the Undead Republic. However, the elves, who had experienced multiple holy wars, only gradually retreated from history. This wasn't only because of the creator goddess favor and the potential of their species. It was also because the elves were quite skilled at interacting with other species. In many crucial moments in history, they stood on the side of the victors. The Undead Republic, the Halitdam generation, and the modern human mage country had all received the elves' favor in some way. Under the guidance of the Gold Elves, the Elven Empire had always been inexplicably friendly to all new species apart from the great demons. But perhaps it was precisely because of this rather weak way of doing things that the Gold Elves were gradually opposed by the superior elves who desired greater glory and eternal life. Why do we have to lower our heads to those lowly monkeys? Why do we have to move to the forests and mountains? Why can't we just eliminate those inferior races? As time passed and the elemental tide came and went, the Gold Elves, just like the other ancient races, entered their final stages. The decrease in elemental power caused the fertility rate of the Gold Elves, an ancient race, to gradually decrease. During the last generation, The birth of every gold elf was enough for the Empire to hold the grandest celebration ceremony. On the other hand, the Holy Wars and other species wars had caused the death of many top-level gold elf undying individuals. Their mental decline caused the elves of the older generation to fall into eternal slumber. The younger generation was lacking, so the other inferior and superior elves naturally began to occupy the upper echelons of society. Doesn't it look familiar? Indeed, the current Moon Elf and Silver Elf society was facing the same problem. Now that the lower species numbers and quality had increased, it was only natural that they disliked the higher species that were becoming weaker and weaker. This had nothing to do with the higher species making foolish decisions. It was simply because society was changing and the power balance of all social classes had been rebalanced. The new mainstream social class had chosen a new representative. Just like how a change in productivity would result in a change in society, in a magical world, a change in the upper echelons' combat strength and strategic leaders would naturally result in a change in society. Or perhaps it could be said that the entire society was calling for change. At this time, no matter what the Gold Elves did, it would always be wrong. And so, the superior elves who held the banner of freedom collectively rebelled. This great rebellion wasn't just a matter of the mortal plane. The elven gods' great reshuffling of power was the key. The final result was the complete destruction of the Gold Elves. The gods and mortals all died. Only Harlois was able to reawaken several hundred years later, but everything had changed. However, the Gold Elves who had ruled over the elves for countless years were obviously intelligent. Even if they absolutely had to delegate power, the Gold Elves handed over the most important military, religious, and diplomatic matters to different superior elves. Although this political structure caused the superior elves to form their own factions, it also caused them to restrict each other. And this also caused the future destruction of the Gold Elves. After the Gold Elves, the most powerful existence among the Gold Elves, collapsed, the four superior elves, who were about the same level of power, faced the biggest headache of all. The difference in power between the four superior elves wasn't that great, and none of them were willing to become subordinates. However, it would be far too foolish to immediately draw their swords against the Gold Elves. That was why the Gold Elves' parliament system and the senate system became their only choices. The result? The elven tribes and the kingdom of the elves were the best evidence of this. Some things only needed to be seen in the end. The elves went from prosperity to decline. The turning point was the collapse of the Elven Empire. Without the Gold Elves as a stabilizing force, everything began to go out of control. The Dark Elves and Rose were exiled from the Elven Empire as losers. The Wood Elves and the Druil Alliance left the Elven Empire and joined the Neutral Nature faction. The other superior elves fought against the Wood Elves, and the Moon Elves broke off relations with the Silver Elves. If the Gold Elves were still around, none of this would have happened. When the Gold Elves defeated the Gold Elves, the superior elves and the elven gods became extremely arrogant after tasting the joy of victory and power. They all believed that they could replace the weak and corrupt Gold Elves and lead the elves to a better future. And then, the superior elves, who had different natures to begin with, began to interfere in each other's domains. The constant friction finally escalated into a civil war, which was followed by a holy war that forced the Elven Empire to revert to a tribal system. Very few species could compare to the superior elves in terms of speed of squandering. Of course, the superior elves themselves would never admit that everything was the fault of others, the fault of the world, the Gold Elves' scheme. Although the Gold Elves were partially responsible for all of this, it was still quite pitiful for the superior elves to be dug up and implicated even after death. Everyone was quite happy when the superior elves split off from the Elven Empire. However, as the superior elves became more and more difficult, it was only natural that some would reminisce about the old Elven Empire. As the entire species was surpassed by humans and other short-lived monkeys, the superior elves became more and more marginalized. The superior elves' lives became more and more difficult, and they began to reminisce about the Elven Empire. As more and more difficult times accumulated, more and more superior elves reminisced about their past glory. Some ancient existences felt that this was quite the irony of fate. And now, the superior elves had once again reached a turning point in their fate. The Moon Elves had officially established a new elven empire. This could be said to have fulfilled their long-cherished wish. And now, this long-cherished wish was indeed quite meaningful. First of all, the Moonwheel capital was nominally ruling over all the elven empire. In that case, if the Moonwheel capital was threatened, wouldn't all the powerful elves be responsible for saving the Moonwheel capital? And if someone escaped from the Moonwheel capital at such a time, wouldn't that person be called a deserter, a shameless traitor to the Moonwheel capital? The answer would definitely be yes. There would always be old-fashioned and dogmatic elves among the elves. The Moon Elves still hadn't given up hope. They desired even the slightest shred of hope. Every day, countless reinforcements would arrive at the Moonwheel capital from all over the world. There would be wood elf druil and rangers who walked out of the forest. There would also be half-elf and human mercenaries who admired the Elven Empire's culture. There would also be young warriors who desired glory and achievements. Perhaps there's a mistake in the information. Perhaps the demon wave isn't as hopeless as recorded in history. Perhaps we still have reinforcements. We have the gods' blessing. We'll be able to survive this demon wave. We'll be able to survive this calamity. Perhaps this type of luck seemed quite foolish. But if one thought about it from the Moon Elves' perspective, what would happen if there was an incredibly accurate prophecy that an island country on Earth would sink into the ocean in 10 days? Since there were too many Moon Elves and too little time, there wouldn't be enough time to escape. And even if the Moon Elves escaped to other countries and were kindly accepted as refugees, the Moon Elves' country would be completely destroyed. Even their homeland would be gone. Would the Moon Elves still exist? And even if the Moon Elves still existed, would they still be free? And if the Moon Elves were surrounded by enemies on all sides, and the Moon Elves were the most valuable slaves in the eyes of the humans, the actual situation would be even scarier than what the humans had predicted. If the Moon Elves truly escaped, with countless Moon Elves chaotically fleeing to other countries, wouldn't more than 10 human slave-hunting squads suddenly appear on the humans' borders? Would they rely on the human nobles' morals and shamelessness? To be honest, this was far too difficult a decision to make. But no matter how one looked at it, no matter what decision the Moon Elves made, it would be a scene of despair. If the Moon Elves decided to escape, that would be the equivalent of prematurely announcing the end of the Moon Elf Empire. The elven calamity and human calamity that would follow would be a heavy historical responsibility that none of the Moon Elves would be able to shoulder. In the Moon Elves' eyes, this would be the equivalent of a slow death for the entire Moon Elf Empire. It would be far better for the Moon Elves to unite and face the Armageddon together. In fact, due to various wishful thinking, there were already rumors that the demon wave wouldn't appear in the Moonwheel capital. This was only a rumor spread by the humans in order to destroy the Moon Elf Empire. Actually, as these rumors spread, many people actually believed them. After all, people always liked to hear things that were beneficial to them. Now, the entire Moon Elf Empire was astonished by the Moon Elves. The Moon Elves actually didn't refute the rumors. This seemed like the Moon Elves' tacit agreement. The Moon Elves were actually pretending that everything was peaceful. The Moon Elves' attitude was quite clear. At the very least, I had rebuilt the Moon Elf Empire and left a mark in history. If I could survive this, I would have profited greatly. And, if I could use righteousness to attract more reinforcements, perhaps the Moon Elves' chances of surviving this crisis would also greatly increase. But, in the eyes of some, such wishful thinking was the most foolish of all. You had already fallen into a trap, so was it really fun to drag others down with you and die together? At such a time, the most rational thing to do would naturally be to shout "Don't worry about me," and then obediently jump into the trap and die. Only then would the Moon Elves be able to preserve the Moon Elves' bones and blood. But, there were many times, especially when one's life was threatened, when an intelligent creature's emotions would far surpass their rationality. Perhaps the Moon Elves who had split off from the Moon Elves had seen through all of this, which was why they had chosen to head north. But, it seemed that it was already too late for them. Perhaps the Creator Goddess didn't want to see the Moon Elves completely destroyed, which was why she activated the invisible hand of fate to help the Moon Elves at such a critical moment. "Roland, come here for a moment. I've discovered something that's quite interesting." I was also rather astonished to hear Harloise's exclamation. That was because our soul connection was a rare surprise and delight. What could possibly make someone as knowledgeable as Harlois so happy? I wasn't really looking forward to the succubus demon lord's treasure trove. That was because the succubus demon lords all had the habit of never leaving their true treasures in their own homes. Otherwise, their enemies would rob them, and they would lose both their lives and their wealth. Fine then, I admit that I had also dug up a bunch of treasure troves and drawn a bunch of real and fake treasure maps. As for my family's treasure trove, I would at least leave something behind so that others wouldn't be able to return empty-handed and kill others to vent their anger. After all, nobody could truly guard against thieves forever. I looked at Didina in astonishment. I hadn't expected her to be so new. But, judging from the undisguised astonishment on her face, it seemed that she hadn't expected this either. I walked into the treasure trove and, as expected, saw a bunch of blinding gold coins. However, I didn't even need to appraise them. Those gold coins were either the dwarf's fantasy gold coins or the devil's cursed gold coins. Instead, Harlois and Marguerite were busying themselves with some tattered antique furniture amidst the golden light. Amidst the golden light, Harlois was constantly wiping a white oak classical dressing table with a wet towel. Roland, this is my dressing table from back in the day. Harlois only showed it to me as if it was a treasure. Perhaps it was because she was too excited to see her own items from back in the day, but even her mental age seemed to have regressed. You came looking for me just for such a small matter? I said angrily. Yes, yes, yes. Even furniture from back in the day can be considered a mega antique. You've once again proven that you're as old as a fossil. Isn't that strange? Normally, the silly cat would have transformed into a flying cat and tried to bite me by now. But today, she seemed rather excited and strange. Mph, I knew you wouldn't know what's good for you. Watch. Harlois stood in front of the dressing table's mirror. Even though she had transformed into her adult form, the image in the tattered mirror was that of a golden-haired young elf. She took a deep breath and lightly tapped the mirror with her finger, causing ripples to appear. Harlois touched her neck, and the girl in the mirror did the same. However, a golden sapphire necklace appeared. The next instant, an identical golden necklace appeared on Harlois' neck as well. Harlois playfully tapped her forehead, causing a small and cute golden crown to appear on her forehead. She reached out her hand and shook it in front of the mirror. No matter if it was inside or outside the mirror, a golden scepter appeared. Avis Ter, the Elven Emperor's will, and the final golden crown. 3 pieces of the Gold Elf Royalties God Equipment set. The lost proof of the Elven Emperor. Didina actually recognized this treasure that had long since disappeared in history. I re-evaluated her age and value. But at this moment, I mysteriously felt that something was wrong with the situation, as if some super troublesome matter was currently bothering me. I should have been pleasantly surprised to see Harlois smiling so brightly. However, this series of coincidences caused me to mysteriously recall my previous conversation with Cassio, the former god of fate. Cassio, can you really control your own fate? Then, can you help me change my fate? I don't need any fortune. Just give me some luck with women, a slightly more normal woman. I think it's rather embarrassing. Can I pretend that I don't know you? Back then, the Hades had already been established. Cassio was in a rather good mood, so he even joked around with me. However, I really wasn't joking at the time. My adopted daughter was already so old that she was still an old virgin. This wouldn't just be embarrassing, it would be a tragedy. All I wanted was a normal girlfriend, a normal family, and 2 normal children. Was that too much? But then, Cassio became serious. Since I was talking about fate, I needed to be serious. Change your fate. Perhaps it's possible for others, but it's impossible for you. Every individual is tied down by countless threads of karma. They shout that they're free from fate, but they don't know that that's also a part of fate. Every existence has their own fate. Some may live an ordinary life, while others may live a heroic life. But in the river of fate, there's no foundational difference. These are the threads of fate. They're determined at the moment of their birth. Cassio glanced at me playfully as I said this. It seemed that he was hinting at something. As the guardian of the Church of Fate and the River of Fate, I can cut and reconnect the threads of karma. But, if I give an individual good luck, I naturally have to give them the same amount of bad luck. This is the most basic rule of fate. There's a limit to how much I can change my fate. I can observe other people's fate threads while I'm in the river of fate, but I'll automatically forget them after I leave. I can't reveal any of them. No matter what changes I make, it's all a part of fate. I was delighted to hear this instead of being shocked. Fortune doesn't matter. Luck with women is enough. Perhaps this can count as changing fate. As for you, you weren't in the river of fate to begin with. You can change the fate of those around you, but you don't have any good luck or bad luck. You should be unlucky, or you could even say that you have the worst luck. Even now, I could still remember how he looked at me with incomprehensible sympathy. I can connect other people's fate threads to you, but that's the same as challenging the most basic rule of the river of fate. I'll toss karma into the void. In the end, not only will I be punished, my luck with women will definitely become a calamity with women. Then what's the use of you? The god of fate is actually so useless. And to think that you're a powerful god. You're so useless. At the time, I was so displeased that I even cursed him out loud. However, Cassio only chuckled at me. Yes, in front of the formless and invisible hand of fate, in front of the inevitable combination of countless coincidences, the god of fate is indeed quite useless. Even though he was clearly talking about his own helplessness, the god of fate seemed to be bragging about the greatness of fate. No matter how much I change or plan, I won't be able to resist fate's arrangements. Roland, let me give you a piece of advice. Perhaps you aren't in the river of fate, but the people and things you're connected to are in the river of fate. Unless you're willing to cut off all your connections, you'll never be able to escape. His playful smile caused my scalp to go numb. I once again confirmed that I hated scammers the most in the world, especially scammers who didn't finish their sentences. Right now, I felt my scalp go numb even more as I watched Harlois show off her treasures to others. Damned scammer, how did I get scammed this time? Chapter 620. Other people would pick up a system, a grandpa, or a mystical ring. Then, they would cancel their engagement, slap themselves in the face, level up, and transform trash into geniuses. In the end, they would either fight to destroy the world or start a harem. How enviable. I meant speechless. As for me, if I picked up some kind of treasure, some kind of inexplicable good luck with women, my first reaction would be that the treasure was definitely a trap, and I needed to be careful. After good luck came double the bad luck, and I needed to be careful. Good luck with women that came knocking on my door was either a dinosaur, a peach blossom calamity, or a trap. Even worse, based on my many years of experience, I wasn't being paranoid at all. I was simply making predictions based on my own experience. My many years of experience with being tricked made my first reaction upon seeing this famous 3-piece god equipment set: throw it away, hurry up and throw it away. I just randomly picked up a 3-piece god equipment set. Am I going to be unlucky for the next 100 years? Chimph, don't compare me to you. My luck has always been excellent. Harlois proudly adjusted the positions of the 3 god equipment sets. She even conjured an extravagant gold and white dress and a perfect adult body. She then began to dress herself up in front of a mirror. Is it beautiful? Harlois started spinning in front of me. The golden gemstones on her necklace emitted dreamy water vapor. The sparkling bubbles in the air reflected golden light. Together with the gold elf's perfect appearance and lifestyle, she was just like an elf princess from a fairy tale. She indeed had a pure, noble, and extravagant beauty that moved one's heart. She's indeed beautiful. She's the most beautiful I've ever seen. I wasn't an idiot. It was enough for me to tell the truth. I casually praised Harlois, but I kept feeling like some misfortune was about to befall me. Killing intent. As expected, there was killing intent. Who was ambushing me? Oh, it was Eliza. Were you glaring at me? Well, it didn't matter. I was already used to her words. Why was Eliza smiling? This smile doesn't feel right to me. Could it be that she's really determined to dismember me? Are you suffering from late-stage persecutory delusion? You're always thinking about the worst. No, I'm speaking from experience. If I pick up a wallet with 2 copper coins in it, I'll definitely lose 4 copper coins the next day. This is an actual example. Why are you all looking at me so strangely? You don't believe me? Heloise shook her head. No, we believe you. You really didn't lie. But with your luck, how could you pick up a wallet? I nodded proudly. Don't look down on me. Of course, I have picked up money before. I have even picked it up twice. I still remember that there were 2 Bardi copper coins in there. That was the first time I'd ever picked up money. The next morning, I even ordered an extra egg pancake in celebration. Unfortunately, the next afternoon, I was robbed again, and I even lost my money. The second time was more than 50 years ago. I picked up a silver coin. A silver coin. I couldn't even believe it. Unfortunately, I lost it that very night. Why are you all looking at me with such sympathy? This was the truth. I'm not bragging. It's because it's the truth that I pity you. It's not easy for you to live. Recalling what I'd just said, I squatted on the ground in frustration. I'd self-destructed again. However, Heloise chuckled. I finally understand why your disgusting fighting style of constantly gathering information, gradually calculating and calculating, accumulating advantages, and then forcing your opponent to the brink of despair before crushing them all came about. No matter how low the chance of failure is, it'll still happen if you're unlucky. Your way of doing things is probably to reduce the element of unknown and luck as much as possible. You're forced to treat a 1% chance of failure as 100%, and you don't expect any luck at all. How pitiful. What did you say? I don't understand. Ah, right. Why is your furniture in the chaos abyss? Although you're still such a lousy way of changing the topic, I also want to know why my dressing table is here, so I'll let you off the hook. Many gazes were directed at Chaos Lord Didina, who had been pretending to be her background all this time. I had originally thought that she would be quite depressed that she had missed out on this god equipment after having it by her side for so many years. However, she simply smiled as if she didn't care. These are all random pieces of furniture that I bought back when I first became the Chaos Lord to fill up my treasury. I don't even remember where I bought them from. It's probably a merchant from another plane, and he came with the furniture. There was also some furniture in my treasury. Most of the furniture was Elven style. It would seem that they were all super antiques from the Elven Empire's era. Indeed, many antique collectors loved artwork from the Elven Empire's era. These pieces of furniture would probably be quite valuable. However, no matter if it was in terms of quality or craftsmanship, these pieces of furniture couldn't compare to Heloise's dressing table. After all, items used by royalty were all incredibly rare. No, wait. I remember that the royal palace was burned to the ground. I thought that the 3-god equipment would be forever lost along with the destruction of the royal palace, unless someone stole my dressing table before the destruction. However, someone who would steal my dressing table alone would naturally know its value. Would such a person really sell my dressing table? Heloise's intelligence finally returned to normal for once, as if she had finally recovered from the joy of obtaining the most valuable treasures. However, the moment that she said this, Didina's expression changed. She suddenly retreated, but a small red dragon suddenly landed on her head. The flames that burned her hair told Didina that any random action would result in her death. I took a closer look at this treasury. Treasures were piled up like a mountain. There was a pile of old and tattered furniture in the corner. If I had been a reckless invader, perhaps I would have taken all the treasures with me. However, I wouldn't have even bothered to look at this heavy pile of furniture, nor would I have been able to find a relatively valuable dressing table among them. If I had been an experienced invader, I wouldn't have had much hope for this treasure trove from the very start. Forcing this succubus to reveal the true location of the treasure trove would have been the most likely outcome. I would have ignored all the furniture from the very start. I had to say, if it wasn't for the fact that Heloise recognized her own items, we would have missed them as well. If this was all intentional, then this was truly a brilliant arrangement. No matter who the invader was, they would always ignore the furniture. If all this had been arranged to conceal the existence of this dressing table, then it was highly likely that this succubus knew the importance of this dressing table from the very start. Heloise, this should be the royalty's greatest secret, right? You probably wouldn't know much about the value of this dressing table. Yeah. Heloise didn't give me a clear answer. However, her beautiful eyes were already locked onto Didina. I had never seen such a serious expression before, which surprised even me. It would seem that Heloise was being serious for once. As long as that succubus dared to run, Heloise would turn her into a sitting duck even without Little Red interfering from above. I was becoming more and more interested in this succubus background. Just as I was about to properly interrogate this succubus, the door to my room suddenly opened, and a small fairy suddenly flew in. Your Highness Roland, you have an urgent report. Extremely urgent. Extremely urgent. Chapter 621. Tell me, is it your fault that misfortune has spread to me as well? Harloise's beautiful face was right in front of me. She was jumping on my head, and it was quite cute to see her fangs rubbing together. Her vicious expression made it seem like she wanted to directly bite me, but I found it quite funny. Fart. Haha, I'm the one who wants you to laugh at me. You little brat, you deserve this. Alright then, I really did laugh out loud. I laughed arrogantly and domineeringly, and I laughed so hard that I rolled on the ground. But right after that, I crouched on the ground in frustration, because I instantly realized that since Harloise was bound to me, her troubles were my troubles as well. In the end, I was laughing at myself for being the unlucky one. Now, the Northland's Mist Alliance saw that my family couldn't make up their minds, so they pushed their troubles onto me. Who taught them to be so irresponsible? Harloise, it's you. In the end, I became the scapegoat again, and this scapegoat was related to the survival of an entire species. I couldn't take this scapegoat. This is all your scapegoat. If it wasn't for you digging out the information and shamelessly tossing it to the elves in the mortal plane, wouldn't this have happened? It's because you don't want to take responsibility that you're the scapegoat. Actually, this logic was quite reasonable. If I hadn't obtained the information, the elves wouldn't have gone crazy, and they wouldn't have forced me to take the scapegoat. Why was I taking the scapegoat? Actually, they didn't need me to give them any advice at all. Right now, they only had two choices. They could either accept the Silver Elves and create an elven empire in the Northlands, giving the elves a way out. Or they could watch as the elves messed around and prepare to collect their corpses. The former would cause a major division among the elves, and it would likely be permanent. The latter would be doing nothing to save the elves. No matter what decision I made, I would become the mortal enemy of some elves. Perhaps I would even be given the title of Destroyer of the Elves or Destroyer of the Elven Empire. If this wasn't taking the scapegoat, what would it be? The demon wave was about to arrive, and the elves were about to meet their doom. However, the elves' behavior had once again surpassed my understanding of how low they could go. Actually, the most rational and effective method right now was to directly disband all of the elven tribes and destroy the wariness of the surrounding human kingdoms. Then, they would organize a great escape. It didn't matter if they became slaves or refugees. They would escape as far as they could and do their best to preserve the elven bloodline. As long as there were enough elven survivors, there might be a day when they could rebuild their homeland. Even if you adults aren't afraid of death, you can organize the elderly and children to escape. If it's just the children and the elderly, other countries will also accept such refugees. However, the elven leader who made this decision would probably become famous in history for destroying his own country and people. He would also become a sinner for personally destroying the elven empire's ideals. But in this day and age, weren't leaders supposed to be professionals at being scolded and blamed? He didn't even have the slightest bit of backbone. He couldn't even compare to a single finger of the foolish King Aulus. Right now, the elves' decision seemed generous. None of us will escape. However, it was actually the equivalent of everyone will die together. If the demon wave was as frightening as the legends said, then it would be the same as waiting for the elves' destruction. Actually, based on our calculations, the demon wave's power level would probably be able to break all of history's records. At that time, not only would the elves be unlucky, even the neighboring human kingdoms that were currently rejoicing in the elves' misfortune would likely be destroyed as well. Even if the elves started a great escape right now and all the human kingdoms along the way opened up a path, they still might not be able to escape. I was no saint, and I had a grudge against the elves. However, I really didn't want to see the entire elven species be destroyed. Apart from the fact that if the lips were gone, the teeth would be interdependent, there was another reason that no one knew about. Indeed, the elves aren't strong right now. But in another 20 years, no, 10 years, they'll welcome a super golden age. Was that inconceivable? Actually, in my eyes, the elves had the most potential out of all the species. In fact, it was even possible that the elves would rise again in the Holy War. The reason for this was because of the Battle of the Hades 8 years ago. Many things that happened in that year were destined to be recorded in history. However, there were also many things that didn't happen immediately. Those things needed time to settle. That year, the god of fate, the god of wealth, and the other gods of the Hades chose to enter the Hades. The moment that they entered the Hades, they gave up on their old divine kingdoms and Valkyrie temples. Countless Valkyrie were scattered in the mortal plane. Those new generation's dawn children coincidentally met with a new cycle of reincarnation and a new cycle of reincarnation. They were saved from having their memories erased in the cycle of reincarnation, becoming the luckiest reincarnators. When the gods of the Hades discovered that the gods of the Hades had cheated, many gods hurriedly did the exact same thing. The Dawn generation, Valkyrie reincarnation, and undead transforming into demons weren't all that different in theory. They were both undead transforming into living beings. However, unlike my revival, the new Valkyrie reincarnation would be a brand new life. They would only have their past memories and knowledge. Fundamentally, they would still be two different people. Perhaps they couldn't compare to their previous lives, but they would have the experience and knowledge of a hero as their starting point. As long as they didn't die midway, their achievements wouldn't be too bad. Even if a myth-ranked hero couldn't surpass their previous lives, it wouldn't be too difficult for them to become a legend. Then, what did this mean? This meant that within 10 or 20 years, the replicas of those historical heroes would appear in every corner of the continent. Aishi would enter a new generation of heroes. This was our ultimate defense against the Chaos faction. Perhaps it wouldn't be effective in the short term, but it would definitely increase the overall combat strength of Aishi. Perhaps a single hero wouldn't be able to change the outcome of a battle, but defending a village shouldn't be too difficult. And among these heroes, at least 1/3 were elves. The reason? The elves had the longest history and had the most heroes. Was that enough? Apart from that, there was another coincidental reason that made me speechless. Elven main god Anslo just happened to choose to betray the Order faction at that time. His Valkyrie temple was filled with elves. A main god had accumulated countless years of Valkyrie. I couldn't even begin to imagine just how many future mega seeds there were in Valkyrie. I didn't think that Anslo would be able to think so much in such a short period of time. It was mostly luck. Still, it really seemed like the heavens were protecting the elves. According to the basic rules of reincarnation, the souls of the elves would always choose to reincarnate in other elves. The location where the demon wave was about to descend would be the largest elven gathering in the world. If the Moonwheel capital's Elvenland was destroyed by the demon wave, countless future heroes would be killed in the cradle. From this standpoint, the demon wave had truly chosen the correct location to begin. Damn it, I need to change my plans. Not to mention Renee, even I might not be able to deal with this situation myself. Originally, I had a plan for the future heroes of the elves. When I notified the mortal plane about the demon wave, I had contacted Renee and told her to take the new Polaris airship fleet to the Moonwheel capital, saying that they were there to rescue the elves. Of course, the real purpose of this mission was to sell some weapons and purchase some magical items, which would count as some war profits. But the real purpose was actually for the sake of those young elves. Even the most valiant and fearless warrior would soften when talking about their children. Even if they were going to die, they wouldn't be willing to watch their children die with them. As long as Renee's Polaris airship fleet told everyone that they had sold out all their weapons, it would be meaningless to return to the Moonwheel capital empty-handed. Out of humanitarianism, the elves would be obligated to take the elves' children and elderly to live in the Northlands. Considering that the Northlands was the only place where elven slaves weren't sold and that the Church of Law was known for being fair and just, it would be highly likely that they would be able to convince the elves. The elven queen wouldn't be able to force her own citizens to sacrifice their bloodline for the sake of glory. It would be impossible to stop her. Perhaps she would even kidnap a large number of royal or noble superior elf children. I also instructed the Polaris airship fleet not to be greedy and kidnap as many elves as possible. There was also no need to verify the information beforehand. It was fine to treat it as a good deed. It would be possible for the Polaris airship fleet to take 20,000 elves with them. But when the demon wave truly arrived, the Polaris airship fleet would use all sorts of illegal methods such as ambushes and kidnappings. It would be quite easy for them to kidnap several tens of thousands more elves. This plan could be described as quite insidious, but the success rate would still be quite high. Not only would it preserve the elves' bloodline, it would also strengthen the Mist Alliance. It would be a win-win situation. But with the current situation, the elves would rather give their children to the humans as slaves than give them to the Northland's Elven Empire, which was fighting for the rightful throne. It was highly likely that Renee and the others would be banished the moment they entered the Northland's Elven Empire. No, I have to go personally. This will be quite difficult for Renee and the others to deal with. While I made up my mind, Harlois was quite likely to have a huge headache. For the sake of my human trafficker plan, it would be best not to establish an elven empire that would attract hostility from the elves. But when Harlois heard that there was a chance to re-establish an elven empire, her eyes lit up even though she didn't seem to mind it as trouble. Not only that, the Northland's Elven Empire would improve the Mist Alliance's overall strength if it was established. All the Northland's elves would have their own home, and countless elves would go to the Northlands. This was a rare opportunity that only appeared once every 10,000 years. If it wasn't for the fact that the moon elves and elven gods were so busy with their own affairs, how could the rightful throne possibly be destroyed? And it just so happened that Harlois obtained 3 god equipment that symbolized the Elven Empire's royal authority. If it wasn't for the fact that I personally witnessed this, it would have been nothing more than a joke of fate. But if news of this spread, everyone would probably think that this was a scheme of the Northland's elves. A princess of a destroyed country becomes an undead after her country is destroyed, and she wanders for 10,000 years with the national treasures. She then painstakingly revives and uses 3 national treasures to rebuild the Northland's Elven Empire. This is a classic story that will probably be repeated for several hundred years, with many doujinshi novels and dramas. At that time, no matter if this was a scheme or a Golden Elf conspiracy, the Northland's Elven Empire would instantly become the rightful throne as long as the Gold Elf Empire and the 3 national treasures appeared together. So many pieces of information spun around in my head that my head began to ache. I originally had a backup plan for all of them. Perhaps it could be called an evil plan, but none of them were anything honorable. Every plan had a different goal. As for which plan to use, that would depend on the person involved. Harlois, just what are you thinking? You still hate the elven gods? Do you want to destroy the elves? Or do you want to revive the elves and revive the entire Elven Empire? Of course I want revenge, don't speak so quickly. Think about it carefully. You're the last descendant of the Gold Elves. Your decision will affect the future of all elves. Ask yourself, just what do you want? This is your responsibility. I didn't want to force her. But right now, I had to force her to make a decision. Although it would be cruel, this was her responsibility. Harlois sunk into contemplation. By the time she spoke up again, she had probably already resolved herself. Chapter 622. A family was a combination of blood-related relatives, and a country was a collection of countless families of the same origin. They shared mutual interests and lived and died together. This was a mainstream concept that was quite suitable in some areas, but it was not suitable in Aishi. Compared to the relatively peaceful Earth, Aishi's living environment was much more dangerous. The threat of magical beasts and the hostility of other species made the basic requirement of survival extremely difficult. The countries on Earth could be grouped by race, ethnicity, and culture, but in Aishi, such a classification was too extravagant. In fact, the human race and ethnicity in Aishi also had countless subdivisions, but in the eyes of other species and gods, they were all just humans. The reason? There was no other reason. Life wasn't easy, and huddling together was the top priority. There was no time and energy, yet there was such a fine division. If Earth had been invaded by aliens for hundreds of years, there would probably be no discrimination or subdivision of race and ethnicity. In the face of a greater threat, this was meaningless. In such an environment, the country and social structure of Aishi were fundamentally different from that of Earth. The weak support and worship the strong, and the strong protect the weak. It was a simple symbiotic relationship, but it was the foundation of all social structures. The weak yearned to become the strong, and becoming the strong meant that they could stand out and obtain a higher status. While the strong gained power, they had to bear the responsibility of protecting the weak. Therefore, under such a social structure, the feudal aristocracy became the mainstream of the world, and from a certain point of view, this was indeed the most suitable social system in this world. From the very beginning, the Knight Lords who were in theft had the responsibility of becoming professional soldiers and protecting their own citizens. Would there be a great communist society after transmigrating? At the very least, there would be a capitalist class revolution and a constitutional monarchy. In that case, who would be responsible for protecting the entire race? Should they expect the commoners who had never practiced any martial arts or magic? The royal family and members of the royal family who relied on their bloodline would be taught military knowledge and the responsibility of protecting their family, country, and people from the moment of birth. This wasn't something noble or righteous, but purely a social division of labor brought about by the internal environment and external pressure. In this world, due to the existence of magic and martial arts, the gap between the strong and the weak was even more obvious. The division of labor between professional warriors and commoners gradually gave rise to the so-called knight nobility. The Son of Heaven guards the gates of the country, the king dies for the country, and the prince becomes the general. It's rather ancient. Then, what does this ancient refer to? Perhaps, some things are common. Even in another world, when life was extremely difficult at the beginning, the so-called leaders were actually the military leaders of the tribes and clansmen. The Yang Emperor, the Yellow Emperor, and King Wen of the East, and the Arthur and Alexander of the West had all led armies into battle. However, the long era of peace and luxury had corrupted their descendants, causing them to rely on the achievements of their ancestors to enjoy themselves and forget their true duties. But even so, in the Dark Ages of the Middle Ages and the chaotic warring states period, the lords still had to fight for the future of themselves and their people. Compared to Earth, the situation in the Aishi continent was even more severe. Perhaps there were luxuries, but there had never been a long period of peace. The Holy War, other species, and magical beasts would forever be threats to every country and species. Perhaps the current human nobility had already become addicted to pleasure and luxury, or perhaps the superior elves had already focused their attention on power struggles, or perhaps the beastman tribe leaders had already returned to the primitive tribal system, but as long as their territory was invaded, they would still have to take up arms and lead their people to defend their home. In Aishi, nobles could be foolish, greedy, ignorant, and arrogant, but they definitely couldn't be useless or cowardly. If a domain lord abandoned his own territory and escaped when a threat arrived, not only would he lose his territory and title, he would also be looked down upon by everyone. This everyone included the lowest of farmers and criminals sentenced to death. In this aspect, perhaps the central countries of the continent, which had been at peace for a period of time, were somewhat lax. Their nobles and knight had indeed become corrupted. In this aspect, the short-lived humans were indeed inferior to the elves. But for me, who was born in the Northlands, it was as if my duty was right in front of me. Ever since I was born, the threat of the northern beast men and the cruel natural environment reminded me that this wasn't a peaceful Earth. This was Aishi, where people could die at any moment and entire species could be wiped out. As the heirs to the Mist Kingdom, Cavendish and I actually had a wooden sword as our first toy. Ever since we were young, we received knight training and military lessons. The great sword saint of the Royal Knight Order was our swordsmanship teacher. As the royal lecturer, Kelly didn't teach us about romance. Instead, she was extremely skilled at using historical anecdotes to teach children about politics and military matters. Being able to go to the battlefield before even reaching adulthood wasn't something that only Cavendish and I had experienced. Countless domain lords' heirs had experienced something like this. In fact, some places even viewed it as a type of test, using the law of the jungle to choose the best successor. Your territory and citizens will forever be a domain lord's root. The reason why the people support you and love you is because you protect them. Your territory and citizens will forever be a ruler's root. A tribe's territory and citizens will forever be a tribe leader's root. Such words could be extended to countless versions, from an ordinary mayor to a supreme emperor. This contract of protection and origin was the most basic relationship of trust in this world that was not peaceful. A noble status represented not only authority, but also the responsibility of a guardian. The glory of the Gold Elves' ancestors wasn't just for show. It was also something that needed to be inherited. I didn't know if the Gold Elves' education was the same as the human royalties, but at the very least, I didn't notice any difference in this aspect. Harlois, just what are you thinking? You still hate the elven gods? Do you want to destroy the elves? Or do you want to revive the elves and revive the entire elven empire? This was such a despicable and cruel question, because not only was it digging at one's scars, it was also forcing one to make a difficult choice. And I had known the answer from the very start. As the last descendant of the Gold Elves, Harlois wasn't the ruler of a destroyed country, but she had the fate of having her country destroyed. If she was still an undead filled with resentment, she would probably be shouting, "I want revenge. Let them all die." Such words. But now that Harlois had been revived, I refused to believe that she hadn't thought about her responsibilities, as she was the only gold elf in existence. However, every time she thought about something like "they won't accept me, an ancient royal daughter of the previous dynasty," or "what's the point of thinking about such meaningless things," she would stop herself from thinking deeper. How did I know? Would anyone believe me if I told them that I had a similar status as the royalty of a destroyed country? Fine then, I had to admit that I had signed the magical pet contract far too hastily back then. Some random things would always come out of nowhere. I knew what Harlois's answer would be, just as Harlois knew that I knew what her answer would be. Although it seemed quite convoluted, that was how it was. So much time had passed since that incident. Although Harlois would enter a berserk state whenever the elves were mentioned, this meant that she had always been thinking about the elves. If she could describe her complex feelings for the elves in detail, it would probably be more than enough to write a series of romance novels. The long silence finally came to an end. How sly. Those bastards from back then must pay the price. Lies and bargaining would be meaningless when communicating with someone with a soul connection. What Harlois said was her bottom line. However, the Elven Empire had been destroyed more than 10,000 years ago, probably between the last 4 or 5 holy wars. As for the people involved, fine then, there were still some. Harlois had given me a small notebook with the names of the Elven gods' former members. Anslow and Rose were both at the top of the list. As for the mortal elves' enemies, not to mention that gold elves didn't even have lifespans of 10,000 years, the pitiful survival rate of all the previous holy wars could be counted on one hand. Right, there was also the fact that Harlois had been hunting them down like a rabid dog for so many years. Not mentioning anything else, for the more than 100 years of Yungia, every time she encountered the kingdom of the elves, she would make a list of ancient elves to hunt down. No, there are 5 more. The Silver Elf Savar and Alcidon were both traitors of the Silver Spear family. They were the former head guards of the Silver Spear family. The Moon Elf Finna Moonshadow was my father's most trusted priestess, but she blinded us. The Wild Elf Vincent, I must have been blind to have promoted that bastard back then. The Wood Elf Ancient Tree Sleeper was the one who forced all the ancient tree guards of the royal palace to sleep. Alright, not a single one of them was easy to deal with. They were all semigod old-timers. After so many years, the Wood Elf elves, their families, and their disciples were all deeply rooted in the various superior elves. Attacking them would be no different from stepping on a hornet's nest. Well, if they were easy to deal with, Harlois would have done so long ago. Alright, I'll personally send them to the Inferno of Hades. That's my promise. Originally, I had promised to help Harlois take revenge only because the Elven Alliance wanted me to do so in exchange for benefits. I didn't really care about it. I would simply take care of any Harlois I met, and I wouldn't actively provoke them even if I didn't. But now that Harlois had resolved herself and made a concession under my persuasion, as a man, I would help her take her revenge. They were nothing more than a bunch of old bastards who betrayed their master. I would spend some effort and pay any price to kill them all within 3 years. Harloise actually flushed red, probably because she sensed that my promise was incredibly sincere. Tears flashed in her eyes. Was there some kind of misunderstanding? She wouldn't normally be moved, but she was moved to help her kill someone. But the next instant, she regained her calm and stopped looking at me. It seemed that she was rather shy. The redness on her pointy ears soon faded. Her beautiful eyes stared directly at the succubus Didina. Her expression kept changing as she opened and closed her mouth. She wanted to ask something, but was also afraid of learning the truth. The three-god equipment was obviously the elven royalty's greatest secret. Only a few people would know about it. Harloise had most likely already guessed who Didina was. At most, there would only be a few candidates. Mother. Didina smiled wryly and shook her head. She knew that she wouldn't be able to hide it anymore. Aunt better? This time, Didina fell silent. But in the end, she still shook her head. The next instant, Harloise covered her face and lowered her head. She didn't ask anything else, but her expression became even more complex as she looked at Didina. It would seem that there were only 3 people who knew about the three-god equipment. After eliminating the 2 wrong answers, there was only one correct answer left, even if that answer was incredibly inconceivable. At this moment, I also covered my mouth. It wasn't that I learned anything from Harloise. She had already done her best to cut off any direct psychological connection between us. It was just that I was able to guess just what Didina was to Harloise from simple family ethics. I can't laugh, I can't laugh. Laughing out loud will really kill me. Harloise will die together with me. I did my best to stifle my laughter as I racked my brain for what to say. After all, Didina really did count as Harloise Sr. Father, no, mother, please marry your daughter to me. My astonishing words echoed in the living room. Everyone's gazes were focused on the person who was kneeling down and proposing. As the person involved, Didina's expression was filled with shock and disbelief. Haha, Harloise, you now have a void devourer younger sister. How does it feel to have a younger sister get married before you? Ha ha ha. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore as I laughed so hard that I rolled around on the ground. The next instant, I also used my familiar cat-biting combo. Don't misunderstand, I wasn't the one proposing. The one kneeling on the ground was that legend-ranked Draken who had appeared out of nowhere. However, while he was proposing to Didina, he was secretly glancing outside the door. There, a 4-legged legend-ranked archer was looking at him with a complex expression. It was such a serious topic just now, but the moment it appeared, it became such a farce. This guy really knows how to forcefully steal the show. What's this? A 4-legged void devourer with a giant mouth. Forget it, it's rare for me to be serious for 2 minutes. I shouldn't watch this bastard ruin my worldview. Chapter 623. The Light of Sinsar Dub, a wise schemer, the legendary elven emperor Abolar VII. He had countless praises and accomplishments in history. During his reign, the Elven Empire had long since entered its final stages. In order to increase the Elven Empire's declining national power, Abolar broke all traditions and prohibitions. Not only did he allow outsiders and mixed-blood elves to enter the Elven Empire's upper echelons, he also greatly promoted the young talents of the wild elves and lower elves, unearthing the potential of the Elven Empire's lower echelons. This allowed the Elven Empire to flourish for more than 300 years. But he was already dead. The moment he died, the wild elves and lower elves who had tasted the sweetness of power rebelled against his daughter. In order to deal with the Elven Empire's increasingly unstable situation, Abolar used a series of schemes to create conflict between the superior elves. He promoted the wild elves and lower elves to keep the ever more arrogant moon elves and silver elves in check. This allowed the Central Elven Empire, which had already entered its final stages, to survive for several millennia. But he was already dead. The moment he died, the wild elves and lower elves who had tasted the sweetness of power rebelled against his daughter. In order to appease the superior elves, he reduced the authority of the royal family, and gave many important responsibilities that were originally in the hands of the royal elves to the superior elves. This brought over many large superior elf families, and also calmed the hearts of the people. But he died. After he died, those important responsibilities became the death knell of his daughter. From a certain standpoint, Abolar was indeed an expert at politics. At the very least, when he was alive, the entire Elven Empire's upper echelons maintained a subtle balance. But his death completely disrupted that subtle balance, and everything went out of control. If Abolar hadn't died, perhaps the Elven Empire would have had some time to reorganize and introduce outsiders and mixed-blood elves into the Elven Empire. But in history, there were no IFS. Was the leader of the reform wise and kind? Was the reform just a hair's breadth away from success? In the end, looking at the result, it was no different from a foolish and incapable ruler who completely ruined the Elven Empire. I actually felt a bit of heartache for Harlois, who had succeeded Abolar. Her father's overly high evaluation of history caused her, a princess of a fallen Elven Empire, to have quite a bit of a bad reputation. Foolish and short-sighted for not continuing with Abola's policies. The superior elf lords who were her uncles and grandfathers tried to force her to abdicate the throne. How could a little princess who was still underage possibly resist? In the end, she could only cancel the previous emperor's policy. The result was that she ended up offending the new half-blood elves and low-level elves. Unable to maintain balance among the superior elves, all the accumulated grudges from the previous generation erupted. How could the moon elves suppress this? Anslo just happened to have successfully ascended to become a main god at that time, and the moon elves already had the most foundational divine authority. How could the moon elves possibly balance the situation? Did you not see the ambitions of those traitors? They were all old ministers who had been promoted by the previous generation. This was the period when the royal power was weak. Without a strong enough reason, how could they take down these old fellows? Lack of political and diplomatic skills? A little girl who was still playing with dolls a few years ago, it was inconceivable to expect her to become a 1,000-year-old sly fox. But again, there are no IFS in history, and no one will look at the process. The final result was the destruction of the country. But I have to say that this was 90% because of her father, who was too good at causing trouble. He took too many advantages and accumulated a lot of resentment, but he didn't clean up the mess. In the end, he died prematurely without any preparations, and the backlash caused his descendants to suffer. Of course, I wouldn't say such things out loud. That was because I knew that Harlois had always viewed her wise father as her idol. She believed that she had betrayed the Gold Elves' inheritance and glory. If I spoke up for her, she would likely resent me. I wouldn't be so foolish as to say such unflattering things. That was because I knew how much Harlois worshipped her father. I wanted to laugh even more as I watched Didina and Harlois stare at each other. Abolar VII had first lost a war against the Gold Elves. Then, he was pursued and assassinated, and he died on his bed in the royal palace. What was certain was that he had truly died. This was the last phase of the Gold Elf Empire. The Gold Elves' true gods had been replaced by the superior elf gods. Abolar, who would have been 100% certain to enter the Gold Elf main god's divine kingdom, fell into the river Styx and was reincarnated as a demon. This was completely different from Eliza, who had directly transformed into a demon. Directly transforming into a demon from the river Styx would be equivalent to reincarnation. As mentioned many times in the past, undead would be transformed into demons from the river Styx. Everything would have to start from the beginning. The lowest level demons would have to experience the primitive law of the jungle. Any demon that could evolve into a demon would have to have devoured at least 100 of their own kind. An existence that slowly became a high-level demon would be able to awaken their memories from their previous life. But at that time, an undead's personality would have already been set through endless slaughter. They wouldn't care too much about their previous life's events. They would only treat their memories and knowledge as accumulations. Normally speaking, it would take several decades for a demon to recover their memories from their previous life. At that time, it would take several centuries or even several millennia for a demon to recover their memories from their previous life. By then, most of their family members would have already died. It would be difficult for a demon to return to the mortal plane. Several hundred years of a demon's life would have already passed. Who would care about a few decades? Demons wouldn't care about the past, either. However, Abolar just happened to be an elf. Didina wasn't Abolar. She wasn't an elf, but rather a succubus. However, she had Abola's knowledge and memories. At the very least, she could be considered a reincarnation. Harlois probably had rather complex emotions as she looked at her father. What Didina the Lucky? Didina's magical knowledge from the Gold Elves and accumulations from her previous life alone means that Didina's power level is definitely quite high. But of course, void devourers aren't any kind creatures. Without enough power to tame them, they would have long since been devoured. Harlois and Didina were still staring at each other, but I took the lead and considerately walked out of the treasury, giving them some time and space to talk to their family. Beifong, come with me. Beifong had always been a smart person. Seeing that the situation wasn't right and that it wasn't the time for a marriage proposal, he directly followed me out. Why did you come to the Chaos Abyss? I'm here for a vacation. I want to see the scenery and people of various places. I want to experience the famous wild style of the Chaos Abyss. Beifong looked up at the sky with an expression of anticipation, fatigue, and excitement. He really seemed like a tourist. Wild style? More like a wild beast horde. Beifong wasn't lying, but he wasn't completely telling the truth either. You probably don't know that you're on the headlines right now. All the crimes you've committed have been exposed. Even I'm tempted by the bounty on you right now. I thought about it for a moment and finally gave up on the idea of exchanging for the bounty. Besides, now wasn't the time to get to the bottom of things. If I really wanted to do something to the elves, every day was important. I would probably have to return to the mortal plane first. However, there were some things that I still hadn't finished yet. Perhaps I could ask this Calamity Beifong, who was ranked 3rd on the Calamity rankings, to help me out. Have you heard of Sun God Aloyo? He lives on the 372nd level of the Chaos Abyss. It's said that he's a super handsome man. Beifong yawned as if he was bored. He's a mystical creature with an eagle's head and a human body. He's an ancient species, and there should only be one of him in the entire world. You want me to kidnap him? Although I haven't done illegal things for many years, since you're requesting it, and since it's for the sake of justice, I'll make an exception this time. Let's kill him. Beifong instantly had a serious expression. However, his murky yellow eyes were filled with excitement and passion. I didn't even have the energy to comment on this. I could only pray for Aloyo in my heart. He's a former main god, while Beifong is only a new semigod. There shouldn't be any major problems. Forget it, I'm not going to pursue this any further. It's fine as long as the result is good. Even though there was a tremendous difference in power level between Beifong and Aloyo, nobody seemed to think that Beifong would be killed by Aloyo. I took out a pen and paper and carefully wrote down my requirements for myth-ranked materials. I then handed it to the excited Draken. As long as you help me complete this task, I'll try to convince Didina to help you with your marriage with the Void Devourer. No, I'll personally obtain Didina's mother's approval. This is my promise to Tina. Tina. Oh, that was the Void Devourer's name. Fine, do whatever you want. I waved my hand weakly. I always felt a mysterious sense of helplessness whenever someone before me was involved. I felt like I would lose if I took things too seriously, and that I would become an idiot if I got angry. Right, why don't you have a chat with Kageo first? After all, you're sworn brothers. This is my responsibility. I'll take it seriously. Beifong nodded with a serious expression. He then walked towards Kageo. His fearless back made me mysteriously think of a brave warrior who was about to be executed. He didn't seem like a pervert at all. You're here. I'm here. You shouldn't have come. But I'm still here. It's all your fault. Kageo seemed to have lost control of his emotions. Yes, it's all my fault. But, those are my true feelings. I don't regret saying them. Friendship and familial love will eventually change. This is the choice of fate. This is what I feel from the bottom of my heart. Beifong had a pained expression. His eyes were filled with sorrow from being hurt by love. He seemed quite sincere, but why did his lines sound so familiar? Tonight's 8 o'clock slot. Oh, thank you. I watched as the two men, a centaur and a draken, listened to Beifeng's incredibly mushy lines. They even seemed to be hugging each other and crying. I was finally unable to endure the churning in my stomach, so I retreated first. Wait, I want to watch a four-way romance. Four-way. Tina, Beifeng, Keijiao, and Aloyo in 2 days. This is a classic combination of 3 men and 1 woman. A romance film with 3 men and 1 woman? That sounds like a normal 8 o'clock slot, but if the core of the film is a succubus, it'll be a heavy taste for women. If the core is a male, it'll be a heavy taste for women. If it's Beifeng, it'll be a heavy taste for animals. In order to avoid being poisoned by the voices behind me, I found a corner and hid there. However, less than 5 minutes later, the door to my room opened. Harlois and Didina walked out. Harlois had a serious expression, as if she had resolved herself.